Did you guys see that movie last year where a 44-year-old high school football coach went and played for the Indianapolis Colts in an attempt at an improbable playoff run? Where did they get the idea for some of these movies? What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 20 team in my preseason power rankings, as today we take a deep dive into the Indianapolis Colts. And Colts fans, it is really good to see you. I'm glad you came up for some light. I don't think anybody blames you for rolling up into a ball and hiding for the last 7 or 8 months after how last season ended and in such brutal fashion, and you didn't even get a first round pick to get excited about draft season either because of the Sauce Gardner trade. But I will remind you that this team last year, nobody really believed in, except for me, kinda. I was kind of the high man on this Colts team last year. And they created all of that hope and excitement that got you so hurt when it got ripped away from you in such drastic fashion. They created that hope and excitement in an improbable fashion. And they do have a legitimate chance to be exciting again this year, make people excited to watch the Indianapolis Colts again this year. But it's far from a given as well. And in today's deep dive, we will talk about all of the sliding doors opportunities for this team that will decide ultimately how this team's going to look here in 2026. So I'm excited to get into this Colts deep dive. If you are as well, please do take a second to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this series. It really does help me out, supports this channel, and helps push this video out to other football diehards and Colts fans just like yourself. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these videos as we lead up to the number 1 team in my power rankings. And lastly, do not go anywhere. The wonderful Zach Hicks makes his return to the Colts Deep Dive series this year, and he brings so much great insight to the table for this video as well. But let's begin. As always, we go through every aspect of the team through the position groups and begin with the coaching staff. And at the beginning of all of these segments, we take a look at their offseason changes and ask the big question: did they get better, worse, or maybe stay the same? And in the case of the Indianapolis Colts, really no discussion needed there. They are running it back with Shane Steichen and company here for the Colts. But this is, in many ways, a hot seat season for Shane Steichen. And I really like Shane Steichen, so much so that I did defend the chances of this Colts team last year when everybody thought the Colts should have been revealed 6 or 7 spots higher in last year's deep dive series. I do defend him here, still ranking him as my 14th overall head coach, despite the fact that he's got about a 500 record and has never made the playoffs in 3 seasons with the Colts. I think there is so much to like with Shane Steichen in terms of the peripherals, how well he's elevated his offense. He's also not even like a Brian Dable or Mike McDaniel, who I've also defended those guys, but at least those guys, you have like relevant things you can bring up in terms of like, oh, does he really know how to like, you know, be the leader of men type, the CEO type of head coach. There's really no real questions about if Shane Steichen is a good head coach, both in terms of running a locker room and orchestrating an offense. He clearly passes the eye test in both categories, but it's the not for long league. And unfortunately, you gotta win, man. You just gotta win eventually. And it's so hard for any head coach to go into what would be a 5th season after this year if they frankly do not make the playoffs. It's just the nature of this league, and especially for the Colts, where you have a GM that's also on the hot seat in Chris Ballard. And then especially when you have this ownership kind of changeover with the tragic passing of Jim Irsay, Carly Irsay entered last season in evaluation mode, and you get this kind of volatile tale of two halves type of season. Clearly, she believes in Shane Steichen enough to not fire him after last year. I mean, most head coaches, if they had the record Shane Steichen had through 3 years, it's adios. But things were working here until they weren't last year. But you're still very much in that evaluation mode if you're Carly Irsay here. So there's so much pressure on Shane Steichen. I think just from where he's at this point in his career, he's up there for the coaches on the hottest of seats. Even if I think he would immediately become an amazing offensive play caller somewhere, might even get a head coaching job somewhere else. and would find himself back in that head coaching chair for someone else pretty quickly, in my opinion, because I believe in him that much. But it's the nature of this beast that is the NFL. So much pressure on Steichen to get it done this year. And if he does, he's probably only going to continue to climb in these rankings, where I already give him a very favorable mark in terms of the rankings for this series and as we head into the beginning of the season. But I also want to talk about Shane Steichen's scheme and the side of him that is that offensive guru coach here. And I mentioned it, but he's really just passed the eye test and with flying colors, like checked every box, in my opinion, going back to getting so much out of Jalen Hurts in that Super Bowl run, coming here to Indianapolis. A big talking point for me last year was like, dude, Shane Steichen has been about a 500 coach with the likes of Gardner Minshew, Joe Flacco, Anthony Richardson, which obviously, like, that's the one big blemish on Shane Steichen's time here is betting on Anthony Richardson, and that has obviously gone as sour as it has. But we saw what he did with Daniel Jones last year, getting probably the highest level of play we've ever seen from Daniel Jones. It's been just constant elevation with Shane Steichen, and it comes back to his ability to scheme things up and just design a well-crafted, balanced offense. And I don't want to spoil the entire conversation because Zach Hicks really elegantly describes all the things that Shane Steichen does so well. But I was just in lockstep with everything Zach does say in the interview here today. But I definitely think the combination of his ability to just put his best playmakers in a position to succeed and not be afraid to lean into those playmakers, which sounds so simple, right? But how many coaches around the league, even some of the good ones, think of the criticism of Matt LaFleur, even in Green Bay. It's like, dude, use your best players more often. Shane Steichen understands that concept. It was the same thing in Philadelphia. It's been that case here in Indianapolis, identifying skill sets, scheming things up to put those guys in a position to succeed. It simplifies things for everybody, whether it is just letting those playmakers do what they do well and thrive doing so. And for the quarterback, it simplifies a lot of their processing and decision-making requirements as well. And then also, I think just his adaptability from a scheme point of view, he came in here to Indianapolis, coming through Philadelphia with that spread mantra, the many, shotgun oriented offense, the 2x2 offense, the RPOs and the read options, kind of that college spread style. And that was the vision, right? Was do what we did with Jalen Hurts for Anthony Richardson. It didn't work out, mostly because Anthony Richardson just isn't good and can't stay healthy. But we've seen Shane Steichen's ability to bring different styles of offenses to the table here in Indianapolis as well. And, I think also draw back to some of his older coaching experience. He does have a pretty nice resume of working for more traditional pro style offensive minds, more traditional offensive minds, guys like Norv Turner, Mike McCoy, and Ken Wisenhunt. And we especially saw this last year with Daniel Jones, the Colts becoming much more of a heavy personnel type of team, getting under center much more often than was probably expected. An offense that has largely been viewed as an 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 back personnel offense under Shane Steichen, going back to his time in Philadelphia, adapted to be much more heavy personnel focused. They were essentially in the top third of the league for heavy personnel usage. They were 12th in heavy usage, 13th in 12 personnel usage. Sorry for all the extra numbers there, but yeah, leaning into heavier, full-sized offensive formations, more of that smash you up front, a lot more focus on the Shanahan, McVay principles that have worked around the league, but also still blending that with what Shane Steichen knows and does well. It wasn't just this, traditional Shanahan wide zone offense. They got really creative in the run game and just did a lot of different stuff. Again, being really creative with someone like Tyler Warren and finding creative ways to line him up and get him the ball off of play action, and have a ton of sex. Have a ton of success with Daniel Jones as well. So really respectable ranks for Shane Steichen. We do need to see him reach that top echelon of playoff success. If I'm going to really view him as a top like 8 offensive mind and head coach in the league, but for a guy that's 23-25, I think is his career record, for me to have him with really favorable grades for both pass game coaching and run game coaching, where pass game they are 9th to 15th with a B grade. B grade as well for run game coaching, 7th to 13th, like really respectable rankings there. Again, my 14th overall head coach. It's about as much as you can ask for a guy that just needs to prove that they can make the playoffs and reach that next step as a team here. Ultimately, I'm definitely pulling for Shane Steichen. I think even if they just make the playoffs this year, it could buy Shane Steichen like some much needed like fresh air and leeway and slack to like maybe start to look beyond the Daniel Jones of it all, where right now it's like, I need Daniel Jones. If you're Shane Steichen, like I need Daniel Jones to save my job before I can even think about finding a better QB for the future. That I think is Shane Steichen's ultimate goal for this year. Obviously, if they go and win the Super Bowl, that's amazing. That's fantastic. But I think a playoff appearance with this Colts team should buy Shane Steichen some much needed breathing room. And again, if they don't make the playoffs, it feels pretty likely that they're going to have to just push that, change regime button. Whether that's the right decision for the Colts when we reach that point or not, that could be a discussion for another day. Hopefully not, though. Hopefully things go right here, obviously, for the Colts. You do have Jim Bob Cooter, elite name for an offensive coordinator. If things start to go right here again in Indianapolis, I do think this is a name that is going to pop back up. Has had a couple of moments in the spotlight as an offensive coordinator, going back to getting some of the best years of Detroit, Matthew Stafford, and then what he's done in recent years with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia and now here in Indianapolis. He's a good left-hand man type of guy to have in the building next to Shane Steichen as well. Now, before we go any further, you might be wondering, now that I have a newborn daughter at home, how have I been able to get enough sleep to still keep cranking out this deep dive series with 2.5 hour long episodes on every single team? Well, and I guess you too, if you enjoy seeing these videos show up across your YouTube feed, have got to thank the sponsor for today's video, Bear Mattress, for helping me get that essential quality sleep to make this series possible. Just like I'm sure you have, I've always seen the commercials for these high quality mattresses, but until I got my Bear mattress, I never really understood just how much of a difference having that high quality mattress can make towards your sleep and waking up feeling recharged when that alarm sounds. Or I guess in my case, when that, oh, so adorable, tiny little human alarm system starts going off like every 2-3 hours. I've had the Bear Elite mattress for over a year now, and I love it. And as you're customizing your mattress, definitely make sure you add the Cool Force upgrade to get that extra layer of comfortable, active cooling relief. And not only is this mattress scientifically designed to improve your sleep quality, but it's also incredibly comfy. So when I get a tight 2 or 3 hour sleep window to fall asleep before Serafina wakes up again, or if I need a quick power nap before a long deep dive recording, it is legit noticeable how much faster I'm able to fall asleep in my Bear mattress and how much more rested I feel when I wake up. What's also great about Bear is they'll send their award-winning mattress straight to your front door and free of shipping charges in the US. It's also super easy to unpack and get set up. They even include a 120-day sleep trial just to make sure you love your mattress. I really do swear by my Bear mattress, and I know you guys will love it too. So head to bearmattress.com/franchiseguy and use code franchiseguy for a whopping 40% off of your mattress order. And that 40% is a higher discount than you're going to find out there in the wild in your on-site locations. So definitely make sure you take advantage of that promo code while you can. So again, that is code FranchiseGuy at checkout. And once more, a huge thanks to Bear, not just for sponsoring today's video, but for sponsoring my sleep that is required to produce a big video like this as well. But let's flip over to the defensive side of things now and discuss Lou Anarumo, who's also a really good defensive coordinator here. He's, to me, I think, still trying to regain the respect that myself and so many had for Lou Anarumo probably like 4 years ago, when he was one of the better DCs in the league in Cincinnati. He was one of the just critical aspects of that Bengals Super Bowl run. Obviously, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, like, that's all great, but you got to remember, like, it was those Bengals defenses that gave those Bengals teams a chance and honestly did a lot of the heavy lifting in those playoffs. And it was Lou Anarumo's ability to scheme things up, the diversity of his scheme, keep offenses guessing, leverage a bunch of different like B-level players that they found in free agency, and just peak as a defense. We're waiting to get that level of respect back for Lou Anarumo, and that's reflected in my rankings for him, like B- grades for both pass defense and run defense coaching, coming in 18th to 23rd for pass defense coaching and 19th to 24th for run defense coaching. So certainly not bad rankings there, but that's kind of the baseline of like where we're at with Lou Anarumo heading into the year. In some ways, like, still more to prove, especially as the Colts DC. I think in his first year last year, we saw the beginnings of good defensive coaching here, but it was not fully consistent. And there, especially as the season went on, there were some really ugly moments. Like that Niners game was one of the worst defensive performances of the year, and that looked more like some of those lost Bengals defenses that we had started to see that did eventually lead to the Bengals deciding to change defensive coordinators there and firing Lou Anarumo. But there was a lot of good as well for a team that dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the season, whether it was DeForest Buckner and Sauce Gardner and Shavarius Ward. Now, some of those players, as we'll see later, still have injury questions this season that they're going to want to work around. But I do think the Lou Anarumo analysis is one of the more unique discussions for a defensive coordinator in the league, because his scheme is really kind of stands alone. So many of these deep dives, there's like 3 coaching trees where so many of these coordinators come from for the most part. It's mostly in that split safety world, either a Fangio disciple, a Mike McDonald disciple, or a Robert Saleh disciple. And then you get a few of these kind of one-off coordinators that are maybe doing things, you know, either come from a different background and or are doing things a little bit differently. Lou Anarumo and like Steve Spagnuolo come to my mind as falling under that category, and also just like schematically speaking, pretty similar in the sense that if you sat down with Lou Anarumo and asked him, what is your scheme? His answer is going to be, well, I don't have an answer for you. You need to tell me who my players are. You need to tell me who my opponent is. Lou Anarumo's scheme is like a Ditto in Pokemon. It just depends on what's going to be best for his defense. And consistently throughout Lou Anarumo's time as a defensive coordinator, whether it's here with Indianapolis last year, and we saw this, or going back to Cincinnati, he needs the players on his defense, especially when you talk about linebacker and secondary, they got to be ready to run anything, whether it's man, whether it's zero blitzing, which was the case here in Indy last year. They ran the 3rd most zero blitz in the league last year. But from a coverage, like a zone coverage perspective as well, they don't have necessarily a preferred coverage. Anytime you're in the lower portion of the league in cover 3 for your zone calls, that's actually a sign that you are really diverse with your coverage calls, because so many teams just lean into spamming cover 3. It's not that they don't run that here. They ran it the 20th most in the league, 30% of the time, but they mixed in some cover 4 and lean into cover 2 and cover 6 a decent amount too, but pretty down the middle as far as teams are concerned with just diversity of coverage. And their fronts can be entirely fluid and multiple, just depending on what kind of players he has along the D-line, what kind of linebackers he has, all that kind of stuff. Lou definitely leans towards these sort of like 4-2, more like hand-in-the-dirt defensive end style of edge rusher, but they certainly will have those guys stand up if they're more comfortable doing so. Because of the flexibility he demands from the secondary, though, we've definitely seen Lou Anarumo want to be in that kind of 4-2 nickel base most of the time. The Colts were near the bottom in the league in terms of base defense percentage. And theirs was a little wacky with how it got charted. They actually were charted with 0.3% of their snaps in base. I think it's a little broken with next gen stats because they were third in the NFL in like short yardage goal line at like 18%. And they ran some of that like 6-1 base with those outside backers really walked up. And I think next gen, if they see 6 defensive linemen, it will get charted as like a goal line defense. So I think that's where it comes in. So I don't know the exact percentage of what their base rate was, but even if all 18% of those goal line snaps were base, I took 3% off of it just to kind of, the league average of goal line was like 3 to 4%. So I just kind of took the league average off, assumed that's how much base roughly the Colts ran. But anyway, at that 15%, they're still 29th in the league for base defense runs. So like they definitely want to be with 5 defensive backs on the field as far as their like formational structure. But overall, like the biggest compliment I can give Lou Anarumo and his scheme is the multiplicity and adaptability of their scheme and defense. And they are ideally prepared to run everything at every given moment. Now, that demands a lot of the players. And I do think that is why, to wrap things up with Lou Anarumo, I think that's why we've seen some really, really like elite high-end coaching from Lou Anarumo. And we've seen when he doesn't have the players to do what he wants to do, he maybe doesn't have that ability to kind of dial back and simplify his defense. And when you're putting too much on a defense's plate that maybe isn't built to handle being able to run all these different coverages and do all the different stuff, you might get some pretty bad results. So as guys got injured, as the season went on, that could have led to the Colts like really falling off defensively. The Bengals defense has obviously lost a lot of talent and fell off big time. So maybe one of the more like volatile coaches in terms of like, if you give them the horses to work with, you're going to get a great defense. But if you even have just like an average to below average roster, you're an injury or two away maybe of falling off a cliff with your defense. So he is, like I said, a very unique conversation. I think it's fun to have that as your defensive coordinator when you're coming from the Gus Bradley era where it was like, yep, we're coming out and running cover 3 and try to beat us. And they got beat a lot doing that. So I think this, like the hope of having an elite defense, if some of these guys can stay healthy in year 2 of this defense, I think really matters because of all that multiplicity and all the different things they can ask, like having all those different checks and adaptability experience is going to matter in this system. So can he get back to that perception as one of the top DCs in the league? It's certainly possible, or things could go south here and we start to kind of see Lou Anarumo more on the decline and on the way out. Really only time will tell there. But there is your Colts coaching staff. I think you can tell, like, this is a staff I very much believe in, that they have the right guys in control here. It's just a matter of now execution and I think solidifying these guys' jobs into the future for the Colts. But now let's get into the roster for the Colts, and we'll begin with the quarterback room. And as we look at their offseason changes, not a ton of movement here. You do say goodbye to Phillip Rivers, who came in and had some fun. And then in terms of additions, theoretically, Anthony Richardson is back with this team after playing a lofty 1% of this team's snaps last year. That alone kind of tells you where we're at with the whole Anthony Richardson thing here. But as we look at this quarterback room, you'll see out the gate, I have them ranked 24th at quarterback. But I just want to say Daniel Jones, probably the hardest individual player to place a rating on for the purposes of this series for multiple reasons. The first of which being, in a small sample size sport that the NFL is, it looked like for the first half of last season, this was going to be the next in line of those like mid-career reemergences. The Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield storyline looked like it was in effect here with Daniel Jones. but it was still at a point where we didn't know quite how much to trust it just on the field for a guy that has had so much not to like in his career, going back to his time with the Giants, right? And then the other reason Daniel Jones is damn near impossible to like rank and rate and predict for this season is he's coming off the Achilles tear, and knowing how explosive he's going to be athletically speaking, more importantly, how well is he going to have his base and be able to drive the ball? Just where is he going to be at physically? In addition to that, this is a player that has been banged up throughout his career, going back to his time with the Giants. Not only is this a recovery injury question for Daniel Jones, it's a sustained durability question for Daniel Jones. So I give Daniel Jones a 75 rating, improving from where I was at with him heading into last year. But I debated just putting a question mark on it and just color coding kind of what tier of QB I think he's at, which right now is as a tier 4 quarterback, which is kind of that bridge starting level guy. But the reality is there is a part of, like, he has the yellow arrow on there, which is half pointing up, half pointing down. Yes, the majority of his career is below this 75 mark. If he regresses to a previously known version of Daniel Jones, this is going to be a nightmare situation, just as it turned into with the Giants with Daniel Jones. But the other half of that is the up arrow, and that stems from his play last season before the injury, which is the exciting side of the conversation. We saw a version of Daniel Jones that we had never seen before. We saw a version of Daniel Jones that I'm sure Dave Gettleman, who drafted him back with the Giants, was sitting back on his couch just laughing his ass off, because seemingly only Dave Gettleman saw this version of Daniel Jones being possible. And what that was a quarterback that prior to his injury was playing at a top 10 level in the entire NFL. And that's real. Like, the tape was just real. If you did the ball knowing alien test and you didn't know anything about these players heading into the 2025 season, had them watch the first 8 weeks of the year and said, give me your quarterback rankings, Daniel Jones would have to crack the top 10, if not top 6. Like, he was doing everything you could possibly ask of a franchise quarterback. The way he was distributing the ball, the processing, decision-making, the accuracy was fantastic. And most of all, it wasn't just kind of what I expected, even if things were to go well with the Colts. And I will take a little bit of a victory lap and pat myself on the back a little bit, because when people thought I was too high on the Colts last year, I was saying, hey, draft Daniel Jones in your fantasy leagues. I think he wins this job, and I actually think he could play all right here. But I didn't think he would play like a top 8 to 10 quarterback, right? And I talked about, playing in a spread offense, playing point guard, like distributing the ball and leaning into run after catch. He did all of that in this offense, but he also was like legitimately driving the ball downfield better than he's ever done at any point of his career. He was doing it so well that we got to truly see someone like Alec Pierce thrive, getting down the field more consistently, when we knew he's been physically capable of it, but Alec Pierce has just been waiting on the right quarterback. I didn't think Daniel Jones was necessarily that guy. I don't think Alec Pierce did either when he was hinting at maybe wanting to trade heading into last season. But hey, good thing he stuck around, because it got him that bag. But yeah, Daniel Jones was driving the ball downfield, wasn't just this average depth of target merchant that I, even in a positive projection for Daniel Jones, thought he might be. And additionally, he was actually like eluding sacks, making stuff happen with his legs. In the past, Daniel Jones he's always been athletic and fast in a straight line, but it's been like when you give him a lane and it's man coverage, he can take off with his legs and beat you, with that type of speed. But we actually saw him show some pocket presence moments, which has, to me, always been the biggest complaint about Daniel Jones, is the strip sacks and not being able to field a rush, not being able to truly like elude sacks and be a playmaker to a higher degree. We saw that side of Daniel Jones too. It was totally just like, where did this version of Daniel Jones truly come from? And then you just get this, like, heart ripped out from you moment with the Colts. And Colts fans, like, my Lord, like, going back to Andrew Luck, Anthony Richardson, like, we'll talk a little bit about him, but a huge part of him being a bust is just him not being able to stay healthy, frankly. And then you finally feel like something's going right. You got someone to maybe buy into, and we can do the South Park meme again.
And it's gone.
Just absolutely brutal. And honestly, that can really, I think, be the extent of our Daniel Jones analysis here today, because I think the rest is pretty straightforward. You praise him for the leaps and bounds he took in his play last year, acknowledging that it was a small sample size, and that I don't think we can fully trust that yet. You can hope that that version is going to come back, and that would be if he can fully recover from this Achilles and if he can stay healthy. Only time's going to tell here, right? So this is the biggest of wild cards, not just for the Colts, but around the league. It reminds me a little bit of like J.J. McCarthy heading in as the Vikings quarterback last year, where we just didn't know, but we knew it was going to define the Vikings season, and it sure as hell did. That's the same thing with Daniel Jones, just a different quarterback and a different point in time in his career. But the entire Colts season hinges, in my opinion, on Daniel Jones. And at this point, I'm pulling for him, and I'm pulling for us to get that version of Daniel Jones back, because I think if he can come back and play at that level, that's a legitimate, at least tier 3 franchise quarterback that can absolutely do enough with this infrastructure to be enough for the Colts to go win a Super Bowl. You know, maybe be this team's Jalen Hurts in that sense. But we sure as hell are not at a point in time where we can just pencil that in. With the Colts here. Now let's have a brief Anthony Richardson conversation. There's still a chance that Richardson is not on the Colts this year. It really does feel like he's kind of run out of lives here with the Colts, and like it's just time, I think, for a change of scenery that could be good for both the Colts and for Anthony Richardson, for the Colts to just move on, and for Richardson to get a team that can like kind of reset him and maybe get him back on a proper developmental trajectory. I really kind of believe, and you can debate if this is fair or not, or if Shane Steichen is right to think this, but I think Shane Steichen is smart, as we discussed, and he knows this is a make or break season for him with the Colts, and the reason he's in that position is because Anthony Richardson has been a bust for this team, because he hasn't been able to stay healthy and has been so inconsistent when he's played. And then there was honestly like the defining moment where he takes himself out of the game on that 3rd and 20, which felt silly at the time, but it really does feel like that was the moment that this team just kind of gave up on Anthony Richardson. But I think Shane Steichen looks at this like, look, this is a shit or get off the pot season for me. I'm on the hot seat because of my mistake with Anthony Richardson. I'm not going to double down on that to save my job and my NFL future, right? So like, I kind of get where Shane Steichen's coming from there. But the great irony here, and it kind of reminds me of like Kyler Murray in Arizona, when it's like, okay, you've got like some sour grapes with the relationship there, but in reality, your best bet is probably to keep Kyler around if you're Arizona. In Indianapolis's case, like if there was not this tension here, if you just look in a vacuum at the opportunities around the league for Anthony Richardson and had him point to like, what are your best chances to earn playing time and then have success when you eventually get out there, this is easily in the top 3, where you have theoretically high-end offensive coaching, good infrastructure, and potentially an opportunity with Daniel Jones coming back from the Achilles, where we think he'll be ready for week 1, but it's not a guarantee, and he's a guy that's had durability questions throughout his entire career. The chance that Anthony Richardson as a QB2 is going to get on the field is higher here than it is in most places. Yeah, you could point to like, you know, Miami or some of these teams like Cleveland that need quarterbacks, and maybe, you know, Arizona or Cleveland could be a team that trades for Anthony Richardson before the season starts. But it does feel like Richardson, with how inconsistent he's been, needs a really healthy infrastructure to develop and have success. Probably to go more like the Malik Willis in Green Bay route type of thing would make sense. But he kind of has that setup here in Indianapolis. So it's kind of ironic that like it feels like he's on the outs. Now, maybe they kind of like, maybe he looks good in camp and kind of earns Shane Steichen's trust back a little bit and maybe kind of puts himself back in the good graces of this coaching staff, and we can have another Anthony Richardson conversation someday. But it is definitely like anything we get from Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis is total house money. He might not even be the backup this year. They could literally just keep him as a potential trade piece the moment anybody gets a QB injury or wants to send a 5th-round pick for Anthony Richardson or whatever it could be. But we're kind of at that point here with Anthony Richardson, the number 4 pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. And then you've got Riley Leonard, who Zach made some fun points that Leonard and Daniel Jones are good buddies, and Leonard very well could be the QB2 here. Easton Stick started some games for the Chargers like 3 years ago. So, those are backup QB names. Riley Leonard's going to have some fanfare coming from Notre Dame. And admittedly, he played week 18 and it went better than I thought it would after they eventually sat Phillip Rivers down. But I don't know how much stock to put in that. I still see very much a backup, like an NFL backups skill set there with Riley Leonard. But it's good to know he can do something and maybe be a quality backup someday. But there's your quarterback room. They rank 24th for me, but I would say the odds of the Colts like finishing the year with the same ranking that I had on the quarterback coming into the year, they're as low of odds as staying at that ranking as any team in the league. They're probably either going to be, get like top half of the league quarterback play like they got from Daniel Jones last year, or we get a bad version of Daniel Jones or a unable to play version of Daniel Jones, and they're bottom 3 in the league in quarterback play, unless like Richardson does something to change that, right? The ultimate wild card, a truly impossible position to try and rank, and now we are just in evaluation mode to see what happens this season. But let's take a look at the rest of this roster that's going to be oh so important if they can get a healthy Daniel Jones back on track here. And as we move to running back here and look at their offseason changes, I said neutral. They didn't lose anybody, and they added a 7th-round pick in Seth McGowan, which could potentially be a slight upgrade here, which we'll talk about. But obviously this running back room is all about Jonathan Taylor, who's freaking awesome. I mean, what else do you want me to say about him at this point? Like, he was an offensive rookie of the year candidate once again here last year, was able to stay healthy. And then obviously like things went off the rails, and it's just hard when you don't have the proper infrastructure to sustain offensive player of the year numbers, especially when you got freaking JSN and Puka doing what they were doing, running away with that award. But he was right back to being that superstar that's got the perfect blend of size, power, vision, speed, you name it. Like, there's just really not much left to say about JT, the player. It's really just like durability has come and gone throughout his career. It just has. Last year he stayed healthy. When he's stayed healthy, he's proved he's a top 5 back in the league. But there's been years where he kind of plays hurt and he's not as efficient. There's been years where he's less available. That's really the only question on JT. You could debate whether he needs to have the like Red Cross injury concern on him. I'm not going to put that evil on him here. It's just, I love Jonathan Taylor. The Colts rank tied for 4th at running back in the NFL with that A- grade. Now, really the conversation that warrants more like actual analysis would be the backup running back room, which I do think matters. Like, part of Jonathan Taylor maybe getting run down a little bit more here in Indy and having some of those durability questions is they haven't been able to put that like good backup complement to him, which I think would go a long way towards just him being able to finish seasons as strong as he tends to start them in many ways and staying on the field. If you could reduce his workload a little bit, and JT gets like a violent physical workload as well, just with his power running style. If you could have someone emerge that you'd be more happy to give like a 60 66-33 split to, give a drive entirely to either DJ Giddens or Seth McGowan, let JT stay fresh and healthy. Like, that would be great. Honestly, I just don't know if things are going to be different this year. They have a pair of fascinating, talented young backups, certainly with questions here in DJ Giddens and Seth McGowan. And then they literally have like nobody else, no proven like work, established resume or draft pedigree. It's really just this pair of day 3 draft picks over the last 2 years. And honestly, both these guys are relatively similar, where they've got the size and athletic measurables that you would absolutely look for in a running back that more often than not tend to lead to success. But both these guys have kind of had some question marks and still do as we head into the year. DJ Giddens has really started to profile as a player that, maybe not everything is clicking for him. He really struggled to win over this staff last year, just in terms of like vision, third down work, where he didn't earn a lot of snaps, but he did have a drop last year, which was a big problem for him in his final year at Kansas State. I think you can question if he's maybe the most consistently violent runner or always going to make the best decisions with his running path. And, he hasn't fumbled here on his lofty 26 rushing attempts last year, but there were some moments on his college tape where he was a little bit more loose with the ball. I think it's more of just a matter of trust and consistency with him that he just hasn't quite earned that yet, but they're obviously giving him that opportunity to develop and mature as a player. And he does have the physical tools to be the guy we're talking about them ideally needing here. So I'm interested to see if something can click for him. And then they take Seth McGowan, who was definitely a talented back in this class. He falls in the draft because he has a really cloudy history that I do think has, been attached to him and led to him falling in the draft. I do think his tape told me he was a more talented back than a 7th rounder. And in a running back class where everybody kind of picked a guy or two to maybe become a starter after the top couple of guys, Seth McGowan was one of those guys that I was more willing to give a chance maybe than some others. I compared him to Antonio Gibson as a bigger running back that really can move. Like you can tell like why he was a top recruit originally to Oklahoma. When he saw things well, he was really dynamic with the ball in his hands and difficult to stop. But my pro comp was Antonio Gibson minus the receiving stuff, which the receiving stuff has always been the best part of Antonio Gibson. So we're still not talking about like some superstar here for sure, but definitely a physically talented back who really broke through in this last season with Kentucky. But I mentioned the shady history. He was arrested as a freshman and kicked out of Oklahoma. He had to go all the way through basically thinking his career was over through, I think, the JUCO route, and then climb his way back up from there to New Mexico State, I think it was. And then finally an SEC program in Kentucky gives him a chance. So he's an older prospect with this clouded history, but everything I have heard was that that's in his past. It's actually really helped him grow, which is hopefully what you're getting here as the Colts. And hopefully their kind of background research on that is going to lead to them actually finding more of a draft value here. But it obviously just kind of adds a different thing into the equation here with McGowan, but the talent's there. He would be the guy I would bet on between these two backups, and I've actually found myself acquiring some Seth McGowan in dynasty leagues and in some deeper redraft fantasy leagues. To give you that fantasy analysis for a second here, I think there could be some 19th round, 18th, 19th round selections of Seth McGowan, especially if I end up with Jonathan Taylor in the first round, because I do think you'd want a handcuff there potentially, and it's not like there's anyone you're pointing to that's definitely going to be that guy. But definitely far from a proven commodity in terms of backup running backs and what you're going to get there. And it could be a case too where we go through camp and they don't like either of these guys, and they might go more to the free agent block or the chopping block to see who else could be out there. But I think giving these guys an opportunity to kind of show that either of them, if not both of them, deserve some backup carries here is good process for the Colts when you have a JT as your RB1. So we'll see where the backup room goes. But yeah, JT's a monster, contributes toward the Colts being top 5 in running back grade, which is obviously a big asset for this team. But let's go now to the pass catchers beyond running back here. Take a look at this weaponry. We'll discuss their offseason changes here. And this was actually an area where on paper they got a little bit worse at wide receiver, particularly where they do trade Michael Pittman to the Steelers. Now, as we'll discuss, I think they're well equipped to say goodbye to Michael Pittman, but it's not like he wasn't still a good player. And, he's not what he used to be, in my opinion, but still, was out there for every game last year, was durable last season, and ended up as a 800-yard receiver last year. Those are still some pretty big shoes to lose, even if they think they're equipped to fill them with the big Alec Pierce extension. And I will say, being able to retain Alec Pierce when it felt like for a little bit there was they made it too close for comfort, I would say, where it felt for a minute like they made maybe a mistake, like franchise tagging Daniel Jones, which was going to leave Alec Pierce vulnerable to free agency, where it was like, is anybody really going to give Daniel Jones the money you're willing to offer him? You could probably get that deal done that they eventually got done anyway, and then just guarantee that you have more time to work this out with Alec Pierce. But they made it work. Good on them. And they sure as hell had to, because you better be damn sure some other teams were making a big push for Alec Pierce. And we saw that big payday. Like they had to get the cash, the money bags out for Alec Pierce. But they get that done. And saying goodbye to Michael Pittman was really a necessary part of that whole thing. Now they did bring in Nick Westbrook-Akine, who's like a dollar store version of Michael Pittman, who we'll talk about. And they did draft a fascinating prospect in Deion Burks in the 7th round. So some minor additions there, but I did say downgraded at wide receiver, maybe bordering on slightly downgraded, but still worse on paper than what they had last year. And then no change at tight end. So let's further discuss this group of weapons. Still a really good group of weapons. Despite losing Michael Pittman, they get a B grade for me. They rank 12th to 17th, and they continue to be a group that just makes sense for me, even with Michael Pittman out of the picture here. And I think a big reason for that is being able to lean on Alec Pierce to handle a lot of the stuff that Michael Pittman was so critical for this Colts offense. For so long, Alec Pierce has been viewed as just this kind of like Marquez Valdez-Scantling-esque role where he's just a vertical threat. He's just here to stretch the field. And then you've had Michael Pittman to be more of that true X, to win on slants, digs, back shoulders, contested catches, move the sticks, be that reliable big target on third downs. With how well Alec Pierce has developed and diversified his route tree and his ability to win in different ways as a wide receiver, I think they looked at this like, we can have Alec Pierce do both of those things perfectly well. And because of that, we can justify paying him $28 million and be the true number 1 wide receiver here. And then with both of those roles kind of blended into Alec Pierce, we still have everybody else that kind of trickles in and does all of those individualized, specific areas that they win that Shane Steichen is so good at tapping into here. You have Josh Downs is your true kind of speed slot, undersized route runner, short to intermediate separator. You have your like manufactured touch demon in Tyler Warren at tight end. You have your backfield with Jonathan Taylor, who's not like a dynamic route runner or anything like that, but is definitely a screen and a check down threat. And with those 4 kind of being the top of the food chain, I think Shane Steichen looks at this and is like, okay, look, I really like Michael Pittman, but if I just need a 5th pass catcher here, I think I can recreate that role in the aggregate.
Guys, you're still trying to replace Giambi. I told you we can't do it. Now, what we might be able to do is recreate him. Recreate him in the aggregate. 3 ball players whose average OBP is...
You want me to speak?
We're not pointing you yet.
Doing what Shane Steichen does so well and playing these guys with more specific skill sets, playing them at the right time in the right places, like a Nick Westbrook-Akine, more of that big mashing poor man's Michael Pittman, if you will. Ashton Dulin, more of that true vertical threat, where if Alec Pierce is going to do more of the X wide receiver stuff, Ashton Dulin can be more of the Z and stretch the field still. If we got to take Josh Downs and kick him outside a little bit more, we can play slot with Anthony Gold or maybe a draft pick in Deion Burks. Like, it just makes sense. You have these more like individualized specific skill sets filling out the depth chart that Shane Steichen's like, I trust my ability to rotate these guys around and get the most out of a wide receiver 3, but the 4th most targeted, if not 5th most targeted pass catcher in my offense. Just kind of move that piece around. So that just lays out like the food chain and the hierarchy of pass catchers here. I should spend some more time on these starters individually, but I've just always appreciated how much sense the Colts pass catchers have made as a cohesive unit. And I think a big part of that is just like Shane Steichen knows what skill sets he's looking for. And it's no different here. But yeah, we should probably spend a little bit more time individually on these guys and the types of seasons I'm expecting from them. Alec Pierce, I'm really optimistic about. And it's kind of fun to look back in the 2024 deep dive when they had just drafted Adonai Mitchell and Alec Pierce is kind of an afterthought. And I had a pretty good take at the time. I was like, hey, hold on. Like, don't write off Alec Pierce. Like, his tape's really good. Give this guy a chance to maybe be even better than Adonai Mitchell still. And that one aged pretty well to the point that he's their best wide receiver now, right? And now Colts fans might not say I'm high enough on Alec Pierce for the simple fact that I didn't ultimately put the green up arrow on Alec Pierce, where right now he's got that 83 rating, kind of solidified himself as this team's best wide receiver, certainly, and good enough to fulfill that role with the proper, diversity of skill sets around him. There's absolutely an argument to be made that he's still getting better and should have that up arrow on him. And I think that argument boils down to kind of what I already talked about. Like what they're going to ask him to do is going to evolve. He's not just going to be that vertical threat. He's going to do a lot more X wide receiver stuff here. There is a trade-off there. Like you're probably going to see a little bit less efficiency. Some of those, the volume of his true role as a vertical threat is the most efficient role in the league. So in no way am I projecting regression for Alec Pierce, but, is it going to lead to better overall play and an even higher upside for Alec Pierce? I think it could, or we could just say like, yeah, he's really freaking good. He's really highly rated here and that's enough. And like paying him was the right decision. Like, I don't want to just gravitate towards putting the up arrow on everybody. I think Alec Pierce at large, like had his breakout last year and he settled in at a really good place, but maybe he continues to just evolve and becomes one of the best wide receivers in the league. I don't think it's impossible. There's no physical limitations, and I have really defended his development as a route runner and winning contested catches and eliminating drops. Like, there is so much to like with Alec Pierce, and I think if nothing else, he can absolutely handle the role of being this team's true number 1 wide receiver. But I do think because they spread the ball around and there's a lot of mouths to feed here, this is closer to like a Packers situation where like your number 1 is probably closer to your number 2 and your number 3, as opposed to like maybe what things were in Philadelphia, where like A.J. Brown was going to be the focal point of the passing pie, right? And that's where Josh Downs comes in. Like, I think just as Alec Pierce is going to benefit from Michael Pittman being gone, Josh Downs, from a target share perspective, should see a larger role in this offense, and even just a playing time perspective, because when they're in 12 personnel with 2 wide receivers on the field, a lot of that was going to be Pierce and Pittman last year. Josh Downs might see a lot of those opportunities this year. And for all the same reasons, you could absolutely argue like, yeah, Josh Downs should have the up arrow on him. He's going to have a further breakout season. I feel like these guys are pretty closely rated to who I think they are. Even if their production comes up a little bit, I feel pretty good about those ratings, even though, yes, they might come up a little bit. And if you're a Colts fan and you think you want to call me an idiot for not expecting even further breakout years for these two guys, go for it. Let me have it. But it just was the decision I made. Like, I think these guys are really good players as a really nice 1-2 punch. But I do think we get to see Josh Downs play a little bit more kind of outside wide receiver, maybe attack the sideline a little bit more, show some of that route running prowess to win on out routes, and maybe a little bit more digs off play action and that kind of stuff. And that could be really exciting. He is somewhat physically limited. He's obviously not the biggest guy. He's not crazy explosive necessarily. Like, I think the best case scenario, if you are saying like, yeah, he's going to get better, the up arrow should be on him. Could he theoretically become this team's like Zay Flowers? There's maybe a 5% chance that, yeah, with more opportunities and a larger ask in terms of routes and getting to do more, maybe we do see Josh Downs take another step, man. But if that doesn't happen, I think you're totally fine with him as a really good number 2, especially when you have Tyler Warren is really this team's 1B, if not 1A, depending on just how much they want to pepper him. But he's a guy that's certainly going to put more fear in defensive coordinators' minds than Josh Downs. I think Alec Pierce is right there with Tyler Warren in that sense for different skill sets. But yeah, Tyler Warren, passed his test as a highly drafted first round pick and one of the better tight end prospects over the last 5 years or so. He passed his test with flying colors, especially in the first half of the season. And I do get into it with Zach a little bit, just discussing like what maybe led to some of the production drop in the second half of his year, and if we should be concerned about that or not. So I don't want to reiterate those points necessarily here, but overall, like, there's really no reason that Tyler Warren shouldn't continue to, climb in the rankings and prove to be really one of the better sort of playmakers and pass catchers around the NFL, and be this really disruptive pain in the ass for opposing defenses, especially as long as Shane Steichen is scheming things up and putting Warren in a position to succeed, just as Penn State actually did with him. He's not the most nuanced route runner. He's not even the most consistent, dominant run blocker as an inline wide tight end. But he's got an it factor about him in terms of attacking the ball when it's in the air. He's got great ball skills. I do want to see the contested catch win rate come up. He only won 39% of his 23 contested catch targets last year. It's a little bit of that Teteroa McMillan in there that we discussed, where it's in there, but the success rate was actually lower than you expect. So if that can come up, that will go hand in hand with his production and his ratings going up. But the run after catch was, you had a very strong feeling that was going to translate to the NFL, and that absolutely did. He finished 6th in the NFL among tight ends for average yards after the catch at 6.4, so that was certainly not a big surprise. So he's already awesome, but I think there is just more even to be unlocked, whether it's being 100% for the full season with another year in the offense, hopefully with more sustained quarterback play, in addition to maybe getting even more consistent at winning that body positioning and winning those contested catches where that rate was a little bit lower, maybe developing the route running a little bit more, maybe developing as a blocker a little bit more, because he was still an adequate blocker as a rookie. And, certainly a lot of these first round rookie tight ends aren't even as good as he was as a blocker, but there's definitely just areas for a young guy and Tyler Warren to keep getting better. But he was in the mix for offensive rookie of the year, especially when things were healthy and working for this offense. He was in that mix, if not the favorite to be offensive rookie of the year for a reason. So, you're really looking at like him and Alec Pierce are like 1A, 1B, and both guys have just like really effective high-end skill sets, with Warren's run after catch ability and ability to move around, and Alec Pierce's like vertical threat ability. Those are really hard things to stop, especially once you start to sprinkle in usefulness with all these other guys around you. You do have Jonathan Taylor, who's, we discussed, but he's always going to be something you got to keep an eye on for screens and dump downs and stuff. He's never really broken through as a particularly efficient or dynamic third down back in that, what was it, the 2021 season? It looked like maybe he was going to really break through in that sense. I think that was the year he was Offensive Player of the Year. But it just hasn't really sustained in that sense. But he's still a factor, of course. He's not a bad pass blocker either. He's very functional there. And you kind of just have this like really good, effective four-headed monster there. And then you can talk about these other skill sets, which I already hinted at, but you got Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Makes sense as a signing. I thought Miami was going to really know how to use Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as that big-bodied slot, and they just didn't. But it's a unique, weird scheme. If you just go back a year with him in Tennessee, and the Colts are very familiar with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, like, he's getting older for sure, and certainly regressed last year, but he's been a like really reliably like clutch receiver going back to his time with the Titans. He's an awesome run blocker, and he's never gonna say a word if he goes 5 straight weeks without getting a target. He doesn't care. He's just happy to be playing ball. He makes a ton of sense mixed into this rotation. It's not like they paid much to get him. I do actually think he's going to compete with Laquan Treadwell, who, good on Laquan Treadwell, has solidified himself as one of the better run blocking wide receivers in the NFL. Now, I don't think you keep both of those guys, and Westbrook-Ikhine probably beats out Treadwell, but to me, one of those guys will get this role as the sort of like big bodied masher. And then I mentioned Doolin, like he's going to be an option as a vertical threat. I think we covered him pretty well. He kind of is what he is, but he should make this team because he's the one guy left on this depth chart after Alec Pierce that can kind of get down the field. And especially if Alec Pierce were to get hurt, you would want Ashton Doolin to stretch the field a little bit. And then you have, Anthony Gould, who's likely to be this team's return man, probably has his job solidified there. Hasn't done much as a slot guy, but there's a chance that he can carve out a role as that kind of classic shifty slot type. And then Deion Burks deserves some attention here. When you really look at it here, like Deion Burks has an opportunity to surprise as a 7th round pick, not just because there is kind of an opening at wide receiver 3 in many ways, but also just for what Deion Burks was as a prospect. Oklahoma just didn't really know how to use him. He was a prospect where you watch the tape and it's like, well, he gets open. He typically catches the ball, seems to have pretty good concentration at the catch point, and moves really well on film, tested off the charts, but they just didn't really use him. And that's always kind of weird. It, makes you think about Terry McLaurin was just like strangely not used at Ohio State, even though the tape was good. There's something there with Deion Burks. We'll see if the Colts can kind of tap into that and if Deion Burks can stand out and kind of get a different coaching staff to like realize he's got talent and kind of believe in him. But he's well worth the 7th round pick. And I mean, there's even enough upside here where if he looks really good, like let's say Josh Downs, and I would never wish this on him, but Josh Downs in a contract year. Let's say Josh Downs unfortunately like goes down. Pun unintended there, but for like 4 weeks, and Deion Burks actually gets an opportunity. There's a world, it might not be super likely, but there's a world where Burks can absolutely be what their vision for Josh Downs is in this offense as well. But that's really all of your pass catchers here. You do have your tight end depth. Mo Alley Cox will catch the occasional pass with that basketball background and the ability to box guys out. But he's not an athlete, really, like not a separator at the tight end position at least. But he's a great blocker, and he's a rotational starter. He's going to play about 450 snaps. They really like him, and his existence here allows them to move Tyler Warren around in a lot of those heavy packages. So Mo Alley Cox definitely deserves his shout out for being the best run blocking tight end on this team. And then even Drew Ogletree, who's a little bit more of an athlete in terms of like vertical speed and stuff, but Ogletree has actually carved out a nice role, and he's done a good job to battle back through injury in his career, and he's a pretty solid blocker as well. There's a reason they ran a decent amount of 13 personnel last year, because they could really just load up and smash you with Cox and Drew Ogletree, and then Tyler Warren being kind of the frustrating pass catching option out of those heavy packages for sure. And then even Will Mallory, who hasn't played a ton, he's made some catches when they've thrown the ball his way in those heavier packages, could be an option as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if those 4 make the team at tight end. But that rounds out your weaponry and the conversation here. So it's a really good group there again. I rank them right in the middle of the league with a B grade, 12th to 17th. And a little bit of upside too. Tyler Warren to continue to break through as a potentially elite weapon. And maybe if you want to argue for Alec Pierce and Josh Downs to maybe even a little bit more upside than that, I think that's fair, even if I didn't necessarily put the green up arrow on those guys. But we got one more unit to discuss with this fascinating Colts offense, and that's the offensive line. As we look at their offseason changes, they did say goodbye to Braden Smith, who once again played about 12 games last year. And they're going to turn to a rookie in Jalen Travis there at right tackle there. But on paper, Travis not as proven as Braden Smith. That is a downgrade. Braden Smith's a really good right tackle when he's able to play. And then they did also draft Jalen Farmer in the 4th round out of Kentucky as an interior offensive lineman, and a priority free agent grade, definitely worth a shout out, in Nolan Rucci, who I actually also had a 4th round grade on. I thought that was a really good pickup for a team that's done a great job identifying talent on the offensive line. So it does show up as a downgrade on paper for the offensive line from their offseason changes, even if, as we'll see, they have a plan in place here. But the Colts were set at running back. They're pretty damn set with the pass catchers. And they also come in as my 4th ranked offensive line. And that's even with some guys that still have something to prove. It says a lot about where the Colts are at. And they've done such a great job drafting and developing on the offensive line. All these guys were drafted here by the Colts. And honestly, I think that's what's saved Chris Ballard's job, is the job they've done with the O-line. And they might have one of the best O-lines that they've ever had here. And that's saying a lot considering how good these O-lines have been. So they rank 2nd for me in the league for run blocking, and they're a little bit lower for pass blocking. They rank in that big middle cluster of just like really solid B- ranked pass blocking units for me, which is 9th to 18th in the NFL, where it's kind of hard to separate a lot of teams in the middle of the league right now. So they're certainly better as a run blocking unit, but not bad by any means. Still kind of top half of the league for pass blocking. And again, there's a lot of upside to green light some of that pass blocking and for it to be more of a strength, as we'll discuss kind of center to right tackle here. But let's get their bona fide studs out of the way. Bernard Ryman, who I think this is the first year I'm going to get that pronunciation correct after years of Colts fans trying to correct me. So apologize to you guys and to Ryman. But dude, he's been a draft steal as a 3rd round pick. He's developed into a true franchise left tackle, a great athlete who's refined his technique. He's improved his anchor, which was more shaky earlier in his career. He's bulked up. He's done everything you could possibly ask of a great athlete that was relatively new to football coming out. And he's a great run blocker. He's a great pass blocker. Is he, freaking Lane Thomas or Penei Sewell? No, but you're paying him for a good reason. He's missed a couple games throughout his career. That's probably the biggest knock you might have on him. Like, you got to keep him healthy, but dude's awesome and locked and loaded. Set it and forget it type of left tackle. Big Q, Quentin Nelson, undoubtedly still in the conversation for who the best guard in the NFL is, and honestly might be more in that conversation now than he was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, especially when he still had like Zach Martin still doing it in his prime. But also in Quentin Nelson's perspective, not just the league framework for who the best guard is, the last couple of years, he's really gotten back to being the Quentin Nelson we really remember and love as that road grader, highlight block guy that will get on the move, be a weapon in the run game. And he's improved his pass blocking efficiency from a 2021-2022 stretch he was just good as a pass blocker. He's been closer to that top 10 level as a pass blocker the last few seasons. So that's your left tackle, left guard combination. Yep, that's phenomenal. That's a core reason why they are top 5 offensive line ranking for me. But you have Tanner Bortolini at center, who's also really fun. And he's definitely solidified himself right on the fringe of like a Pro Bowl, like top 5 to 7 center in the NFL. but he got better from his rookie year to last year. If he takes another step and becomes just a little bit more efficient as a pass blocker and even more consistent as a run blocker, just kind of like eliminate negatively graded runs where right now there's not a lot of them. But if he can just become a truly elite run blocker and a pretty good pass blocker, like there's still, I think, another level for Tanner Bortolini, who's a great athlete that's bulked up a little bit from his time at Wisconsin, and he's also just really good and could be, again, even another step forward as a great center. Really had a good, fun year last year. Sitting pretty from left tackle to center. Now that the questions start to stack up, really, the more you go from like center out to right tackle. You got Matt Goncalves at right guard, who has been far from a liability, right? Like he has given the Colts a baseline of like, you know, relatively high floor, adequate guard play as a pretty big body and a guy that can move people in the run game. And he's been closer to an asset in that phase. And he's been more of a week-to-week pass blocker as he's made that transition from college tackle to guard. There's weeks where you can see, like, especially when you had Braden Smith at right tackle, you could look at this group and be like, yeah, Goncalves is the guy you want to isolate in pass pro, like him and Bortolini, really. But, like, there's still room for Goncalves to become a more consistent player across the board, but especially in pass pro. But the arrow is still pointing up on him. Like, he's still young with the way the Colts have developed an offensive line. You're just feeling pretty good about that, right? Like, if nothing else, he doesn't really get a whole lot better. And at a weak link position, he is far from a liability, right? But he has traits himself, right? He was the definition of what these Colts look for. Third, fourth round, they draft the traits and they develop these guys so well. Tony Sperano Jr. deserves so much credit as one of the best O-line coaches in the league, and this Colts front office that deserves a lot of criticism for a lot of stuff they've done. I said it earlier, but I think the main reason those guys still have a job is what they've done with the O-line, and Goncalves is another part of that. So he's got a chance to keep climbing and be more of a top 15 or so guard. Like, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities for him. So you love where you're sitting there, just more to prove. And then at right tackle, this is the biggest wild card on this unit with Jalen Travis. Talk about another fourth-round draft pick with traits galore. He's like 6'8", 350, if not even bigger than that. But he's a colossal human. He's kind of similar to the idea that I think I think Shane Steichen would probably say, if he hasn't said publicly, that he probably reminds him a little bit of Jordan Mailata, just the sheer mass of him. There's going to be some movement question marks at times with a guy like that, but they draft him in the fourth round. They didn't know how much he was going to have to play right away, but they probably figured, hey, Braden Smith gets hurt all the time. Maybe Jalen Travis gets an opportunity to show us a little bit. And if that scenario plays out and Jalen Travis plays pretty well, I wouldn't be surprised if they had some of those conversations of like, as long as we get 4 starts from Jalen Travis and he looks okay, we're going to roll forward with him and save some money on Braden Smith, who was a pending free agent. And that's exactly what they did. But Travis didn't just show flashes like they were probably hoping they could see from him to green light, him starting this year and them seeing what they have in him. He showed a high enough level of play that you're actually feeling relatively confident going from an injury-prone, getting older Braden Smith to Jalen Travis, who comes in halfway through week 14 in the Jags game. Probably his best start, honestly, locking dudes down in that game. And there's a little bit of that, like, pinch hitter coming off the bench or someone coming in from the bullpen where there's a lot of prep work that goes into like pass rushing and stuff. And you go from a shorter arm Braden Smith to having to deal with this behemoth at right tackle. It probably changes your approach a little bit, but he stepped in and was great week 14. And then just the next 4 weeks he started and, he had to protect for Phillip Rivers, who's kind of a sitting duck back there, and gave up a couple pressures per game with Rivers back there, getting rid of the ball relatively quicker in, week 18 against Houston. And rookie Riley Leonard back there did give up 4 pressures. But that's asking a lot of Jalen Travis in his 4th career start in that matchup there. But definitely a lot to like. And the run blocking kind of speaks for itself. There might be, a lack of leverage and lack of coordination at times with his size, but There's a lot to like. It's, you're far from like established or through the woods to say like, yep, he's your next plug and play right tackle, just like they've done with all these guys. Quentin Nelson is the only first round pick out of this awesome group. They've earned a lot of benefit of the doubt to look at Jalen Travis and be like, they know what they're doing here. He's going to be not just fine, but he might actually be pretty damn good. There are some of those names that come to my mind, guys like Jordan Mailata or like a Spencer Brown was a third round pick who's a franchise right tackle and a damn good one for the Bills. Like, could they get something like that out of Jalen Travis as early as this season? I mean, we know how things go with the NFL. It's, the odds of every green light getting hit are pretty low, but there is a chance that Jalen Travis is that level. Matt Goncalves really solidifies himself as just a really quality starter. Tanner Bortolini becomes a Pro Bowl type of guard. You've got what you've got at guard and left tackle. That's not just the best offensive line in the NFL this season. If all those green lights get hit, that's going to stack up with some of the elite offensive lines that come to mind over the last 10 years. Most recently, what Shane Steichen had in Philadelphia, right? So, that will get you excited for any Colts fan, the theoretical upside of this offensive line, and you're feeling pretty good about the floor. There's a certain floor there with Jalen Travis, just, maybe it was a little bit of a blip, and there's more bad than good. There's a chance that happens, of course, as well. And if that does, you don't really have the solidified tackle depth and a plan B there. You might even be having Taylor Decker's button on speed dial or something like that if Travis really struggles early and you're really in dangerous territory trying to save your job here and not get Daniel Jones killed from that right tackle spot. Blake Freeland is not a good player. I didn't like him as a draft pick. He's an athletic, tall guy, but I really think he struggles with the leverage. And, Jalen Travis is 6'7", 340 pounds. If the idea is it's easier to get under those guys' pads and beat with the bull rush, it's nice to have 340 pounds behind you. Blake Freeland's like 305. Like, it's pretty easy to get up and under him and move him around, even if he's tall and athletic. I've never been a big Blake Freeland fan, and he's really struggled. I'm surprised that he is kind of their plan B right now. You've got a couple undrafted types like Luke Tenuta. It was kind of the same idea as Blake Freeland coming out. And I do actually really like Nolan Rucci, and I do put the eyeballs on him. Like, you got to put this all in perspective. Like, he still ended up going undrafted. He's not a super high upside player. But I definitely thought he had swing tackle potential as a fourth round pick. And if Travis, for some reason, does just really struggle, or if one of these guys gets hurt, I would not be the least bit surprised if Nolan Rucci actually steps in as an undrafted free agent and kind of holds it down to a decent degree. Like, maybe like what Dylan Cook did for the Steelers last year, where the tackle gets hurt and it's like, well, we at least got a Band-Aid there as an undrafted pickup. That can do a little bit of everything for us. I liked his tape. Like, he's kind of maxed out, just doesn't move all that well, but clearly was coached well at Penn State, and I definitely thought should have been drafted. And then you go to the interior of the offensive line for depth, and the biggest piece I'm fascinated by is Jalen Farmer, who, there's not really an opportunity for him here, right? Like, you're probably looking 2-3 years down the road where maybe it's a Goncalves walks in free agency, or maybe Quentin Nelson retires or something like that. Jalen Farmer is par for the course with every one of these guys listed on the screen here, right? Like, fourth round pick, super athletic, inconsistent college tape, but get him in the right hands of a good offensive line coach with the right mentors around him. When things clicked for Jalen Farmer, you were like, holy shit, that's Trey Smith for the Chiefs. That's, Tyler Smith for the Cowboys. Like, that is exactly what an elite guard is supposed to look like. His good reps, if you're just sending the 10-play highlight reel out to these GMs, you would look at Jalen Farmer and you're like, damn. Now, he fell off blocks. He blew assignments in pass pro. Like, the technique was good one play, bad the next. There's everything to clean up with Jalen Farmer, but I thought he had become a value and was too good to pass up when they took him. And if 3 or 4 years from now, Jalen Farmer is the next in line, and he even has more upside than like Goncalves, especially, just a good draft pick. to develop and keep the pipeline coming, even if the impact this year probably is not something you want to count on. The same with the other veteran backups on the inside. Jimmy Morrissey, Dalton Tucker have played a little bit, but it hasn't looked pretty. Josh Sills, maybe. I thought was a good pass blocker coming out of college. Overall, the depth is not great. My favorite pieces of depth are a pair of rookies there, honestly. And one of them's undrafted, as we talked about. So you've got to keep these guys healthy. But overall, this is a phenomenal offensive line to wrap up an offense that obviously, you can especially see why Daniel Jones is such a freaking wild card. And you look back and remind yourself how good the infrastructure is here with the Colts. And it kind of re-sparks your memory of oh yeah, things were really effing good here. Daniel Jones was playing really well, but you see the surrounding core and you're like, there's probably a pretty good reason he was playing that well. And the Colts, by the way, were shattering offensive efficiency numbers last year. I don't know that they'll be on pace for being a historically efficient offense like they were last year. But it's not impossible that they get back on that track. And obviously, just that big question mark with Daniel Jones is everything here. It really is. The Colts rank second for me in run game and could easily be first if a couple of those offensive line green lights get hit. That's pretty self-explanatory. But they rank 22nd for passing game, with the quarterback kind of coming in at 24th. And that combines to make them 14th for the overall offense for this series. But if they get top 10 QB play with the rest of this infrastructure, with that run game, easily this team could be back to being a top, not just 10, but top 8, 6, 5 offense. There's a lot of upside with this team. It all comes back to Daniel Jones staying healthy, and then showing us that last year wasn't a fluke either. It just all comes back to him, man. It's the thinnest of ice, the most rickety of bridges. But if you can make your way across it, there's a pot of gold sitting at the other side. And that's a good analogy, I think, for the Colts offense to wrap things up on that side of the ball. But let's flip over and discuss Lou Anarumo's defense here. And we'll begin by taking a look at their offseason changes up front with the defensive line. And they actually are really rocking the boat here. There's a lot of moving pieces, both with the interior D-line and at edge. When you add up all of their losses, it's pretty minimal, right? Neville Gallimore leaves and was the next player that the Chicago Bears, for some reason, wanted to spend money on, but he was a rotational athlete on the D-line that played 40% of their snaps. I don't think he'll really be missed. They lost some names at edge, right? Kwity Paye got a big contract from the Raiders. Kwity Paye's been a decent number 3 here. He's a loss, but honestly, if I'm a Colts fan, it's whatever. He was pretty damn disappointing for a first-round pick. Very replaceable skill set. Samson Ebukam was okay, played 36% of snaps in a rotational role in a decent bounce-back season last year, but replaceable for where he's at in his career. Tyquan Lewis, again, 28% as that rotational role. Pretty minimal in terms of losses. Now, in terms of additions, you've got 7 new names to be brought up with your front. You have 3 new interior D linemen, kind of rotational roles. Colby Wooden was acquired in a trade for Zaire Franklin with the Packers. They signed some veterans in Derek Nadi and Jerry Tillery to fill out the depth. It's enough to say slightly upgraded when Neville Gallimore was your loss. You probably still wanted a little more if you were a Colts fan, but it is still slight upgrades in terms of depth. And then on the edge, they bring in veteran Arden Key, familiar divisional inter-division rival foe. Michael Clemens gets brought over on actually a 3-year deal from the Jets. And then they spent a couple of day 3 picks on a developmental George Gums and Caden Curry out of Ohio State. Now, when I compare those additions of Key, Clemens, and the rookies to the losses of Paye, Ebukam, and Lewis, do I prefer the talent that left? Yeah, but it's it's so minimally downgraded that I debated calling it neutral, but on paper it is an like the absolute slightest of downgrades that is very, very minimal. And honestly, with all this, you also can't mention that talk about heartbreak for the Colts. It really sounds like they had Trey Hendrickson to come here with reuniting with Lou Anarumo, and then the whole Max Crosby saga plays out. The kind of like friendly fire or, domino effect of that whole thing was the Colts were sitting there like, no, like we have to go from Trey Hendrickson to Arden Key. And it's just like, all right, here we go. Looking back at this Colts defensive line where it's like, we don't suck, but they've really wanted to just push things over the edge here. Pun unintended, but especially with that edge group, but just getting more with this defensive line they've left a little bit to be desired with the D-line for years. And as we look at the Colts defensive line again this year, I think you're kind of back in that place. There is, though, a path for this to be maybe the best the defensive line has been in certainly the Shane Steichen time frame here. But, I mean, you got to start with DeForest Buckner. Like, this is the perfect example of a player that in this deep dive series you look at now in July, and you see the beautiful, like, superstar, blue-coated player, the best player on this D-line, knowing the impact a healthy DeForest Buckner makes. It's not like he's really regressed when he has played. And you look at this and you're like, with the rest of these pieces, and you're like, wait, 20th? How is this the 20th best defensive line in the league? 19th to 22nd for pass rush, 19th to 21st for D-line run defense. Like, TFG, you're smoking crack. Like, they got DeForest Buckner. What are you talking about? They might have DeForest Buckner. I mean, who knows? He's missed half the season the last 2 years. He's one of these freaky 6'7" athletes that there's these guys that they start to get neck and back injuries, and it's just like the human body isn't supposed to like move like that and handle a physical sport on top of that with football. Some of that's starting to add up for now a 32-year-old DeForest Buckner, and it's like, okay, if he's healthy and we don't even know if he's going to be available to start the season coming off of a really scary neck injury from last year. Like, if he's out there and he's DeForest Buckner, yeah, this D-line's going to be better than the 20th D-line in the league, and it could go a long way towards the Colts, like, meeting those playoff expectations and Lou Anarumo having a great defense. 100%. Or he's just either regresses coming off a neck injury, or probably the most likely outcome is he's going to miss a lot of time, because that's unfortunately been the story with him. So you start to now throw him on top of Daniel Jones with just an incredibly like injury-based wild card that is, you start to stack these up, and spoiler alert, we've got another one with Shavarius Ward in the secondary, and the range of outcomes with some of the most important players on this team starts to open up a super vast, wide range of outcomes for this Colts team. So that, I think, is the most important conversation to be had about the Colts defensive line. But it's not the entire conversation. We can bounce back out to the edge, where I do want to talk about Laiatu Latu, who's definitely a bright spot for this Colts team. And, the expectations have always been high with Latu, whether, you closely followed the draft, and a lot of people viewed him as one of, if not the best defensive players in that draft. There's the infamous clip of Chris Ballard laughing, we got the best effing pass rusher in the draft at 15. How did we do that? Well, and then Jared Verse gets picked four picks later, and it just raises the stakes even more for Laiatu Latu. But I definitely made an effort to go back and do a deep dive into Laiatu Latu's tape just to like get a stock check with where we're at with him, because he's always going to be compared to Jared Verse. And that's taken a whole new turn now that he's been traded for Myles Garrett. But anyway, like, he has not been as good as Jared Verse, but Latu has been very much on his own path towards hopefully becoming a legitimate number one edge rusher for the Colts. And I think year two was another good step in that direction. I still think he's not the most dynamic athlete. He's not the most powerful player. But he was a productive rookie, a very good rookie, and he's always been a good run defender. Like, you can kind of get that out of the way. Like, he's got the length and effort and strength to be a good run defender. But from a pass rushing perspective, year one was like, all right, you got the cross chop, you're savvy, you win late with like effort and disengagements. That's a good baseline. Then heading into last year, the thing I said about him as a prospect, and I certainly said about him heading into year two, was like, I need to see him win with more of a power element to his game. And I think he heard so much of that. Hopefully and ideally it was from his coaching staff, but also like people in the media pointing out like that's what's been missing with Latu in college and in his rookie year. And we saw him in year two use the bull rush much more often, and he started to rack up some good bull rush wins. And I don't need him to be a dominant bull rusher, but it needs to be enough that offensive linemen are going to respect it so that he can really build off of that with where he's best, which is as a really quick athlete for a bigger player. His ability to just win with lateral kind of Euro steps and cross chops and swipes. It's what made him such a special prospect. I raved about a point that Trevor Sikkema also shared, his speed to counter, like just really quick-footed, quick-minded, and quick with his hands, and he pairs that all together. But you need that baseline of a power rush. And the fact that we saw it to a decent degree in year two is awesome. If we can just dial that knob up a tick more and continue to refine that pass rushing skill set around the bull rush, do I think Latu can, there's always room for development, but can he take that quote-unquote final leap to being a legitimate number one piece? And I don't need him to be Will Anderson, Myles Garrett, like that. He just doesn't have those tools. But could he maybe be more of like what Trey Hendrickson has been, where maybe some of those tier 2 number 1 edge rushers have been throughout their career, whether that's like DeMarcus Lawrence, Cam Jordan, maybe top 10 to 12 edge rushers in the league. Can we get Latu to that point and just pencil that in and count on that as a building block for the rest of this defensive line as you continue to get older with Buckner and Stewart and find other edge players? That's a huge area to look at for this Colts team, not just for their success this year, but just as you look at building out this defense for the future, especially because they did strike out on Trey Hendrickson. They really need Latu to be that guy, especially if Buckner's going to be hurt. So I really like year 2, the step he took. I think he's in the top 20 right now for edge rushers. Can we take that next step this year? I think there's cautious optimism that he can do that. But after you talk about Buckner and Latu, this is a hard D-line to get excited about. And you can really contextualize that. Like if Buckner's out of the picture, it's pretty rough. Grover Stewart is Grover Stewart, but he's 32 years old. He has been on the decline. He's still an excellent nose tackle, still great for your run defense. Like he's absolutely a factor there. And the sheer just strength and volume of Grover Stewart, like he can get you the occasional rush, but he's not an impactful dynamic pass rushing presence on third downs. That's the reason that let's just stick with the interior D-line. Like that's the reason they basically have a depth chart full of mostly just like athletics, call them stuntmen. I think the idea of a stuntman being a role for a D lineman is really fun as a nickname. Especially as the use of stunts, twists, and pass rush games has become more prominent in the NFL than it's ever been. And we see a lot of these, Ade Adebawore, Colby Wooden, a Jerry Tillery, these guys that like, they don't really win one-on-one reps, but they're undersized and super quick and can operate your stunts. They can get off the ball and kind of penetrate quickly, and they can do those loops and twists. And their quickness in between the tackles and sometimes to loop around the tackle is a unique weapon that certainly like a Grover Stewart doesn't have. So, they're going to take Stewart off the field, and it's going to be Adebawore, who actually did rack up like 30-something pressures last year. I went and watched him just to make sure I'm not missing something because I loved him as a prospect. And I'm always honest with you guys, like, especially now that we have NFL Pro and I can do that. Like, that gives me the ability to go back to an Adebawore who I loved as a draft prospect and be like, all right, is he like winning one-on-one reps? Did he unlock something as a rusher? Or was this just Lou Anarumo being Lou Anarumo and leveraging him on third downs. And unfortunately, that's what I saw with Adebawore, was just an athlete that has enough athletic tools to leverage in the right system. But outside of one game against the Jaguars, now it did come later in the season where he actually had a couple of cross-facing pass rush wins where he showed off the quickness. Largely, I'm not really counting on Adebawore to be more than that quote-unquote stunt man. But who knows? Maybe another step, he clicks it, from that Week 17 game and carries it into next year. But he'll be in the mix along with Colby Wooden, who was acquired from the Packers for Zaire Franklin. Wooden is still learning, and he's flashed a couple games here and there. Largely as a pass rusher, but occasionally getting off blocks and being a decent 3-tech as a run defender. I'm a Packers fan, hand up. I'm not really going to miss Colby Wooden. He's a fun project. Played kind of a big bodied edge in college, and he's kind of started to learn to transition to D-line, but interior D-line. But, he's still in that category as a project. We'll see what they can get out of him. And then, I guess you would just bring in Jerry Tillery. I don't know that he'll necessarily make this team. He's definitely regressing. He's been very much in that athletic pass rush downs, defensive tackle mold as a first round bust, but he's extended his career because he's got quickness and a first step and a bull rush that'll get you 3 or 4 bull rush wins in the course of a season. Now, I will give the Colts just a tiny amount of credit. In the last couple of years, it's felt like I've just been begging the Colts to make even a Derek Nadi type of signing because they've had Buckner and Stewart, where talk about being on thin ice and risking the thought that you're going to have these guys all year at their age. I've just wanted them to put some sort of a veteran commodity with some size in between the tackles, and they haven't done that. Derek Nadi is exactly what he is. He is just there to sit down at the line of scrimmage and just try to not go anywhere. He's not going to make a single play for you, but he's got a good 40, 50 pounds on guys like Adebawore and Colby Wooden, and there's a place for that type of player. So if Grover Stewart is to get hurt or you need an extra body at the goal line, I like having Derek Nadi for 8 or 9 snaps a game. So I like that as a signing just to fill out the depth chart. And then Cameron Ball as well is a guy with a little bit more size that actually had some decent run defense tape. Was pretty surprised he was not drafted. Was another good undrafted pickup, and he might end up starting on the practice squad, but someone to keep an eye on down the road to maybe be more of a run defense, rotational defensive lineman type of guy in the interior. So we knocked out the interior D line there. You go to the edge group, we still have a lot of guys to talk about. Okay, Arden Key as your fallback plan for Trey Hendrickson. The role is the same as someone that's more prominently going to be a pass rush oriented edge rusher. And you're going to look at guys like JT Tuimoloau and Michael Clemens to eat up some more run defense duties on earlier downs. That's what they would have done with Trey Hendrickson. And it's what they're going to do with Arden Key. Now, that's a pretty freaking steep drop off, right? Arden Key has been a nice player. I do think we saw a dip in his pass rushing efficiency, and maybe it's just because Tennessee's edge group got so bad last year that Arden Key actually was just getting double teamed, but he is on the other side of 30 now, and we've seen that drop in play. So he's a Band-Aid option. He is, honestly, I think he's at worst the same level pass rusher that Kwity Paye was. I'm totally on board with not paying Kwity Paye $15 million a year and just going to the bargain bin to bring in Arden Key. From a process standpoint, I like that. It's just you need a little more here, and we're hoping to get Trey Hendrickson. That's certainly not what Arden Key is, but he accomplishes the role as someone that can have a pulse as a pass rusher basically, because the rest of these edge rushers aren't going to give you that. JT Tuimoloau, I think showed the skill set of what you expected when you drafted him as more of a early down edge 3 type of piece was always kind of the projection for him. He didn't get as much playing time and honestly wasn't quite as good as a run defender as you maybe even expected him to be as a rookie. So he's got more to prove, but I think there's still both opportunity and a reason to believe that he's going to be sort of that like Kingsley Enagbari idea of just a heavy-handed edge 3 that is largely there to help get you to third down, and then he'll come off the field. And I think they really value that. Looked at some of the guys they lost, because like Kwity Paye helped them do that. Samson Ebukam helped them do that. Tyquan Lewis helped them do that. They couldn't just count on Tuimoloau, even if he takes that next step forward. Like, they want a couple of different guys to play that role for them. So Michael Clemens definitely profiles as that. He has not been very good the last couple of years. He's been kind of the GOAT for the Jets fans. I feel like now that GOAT has become as popular as it is, we need a different term for the idea of the GOAT being the guy that like fans circle as like the problem area. So there's been some bad moments with Clemens, and Jets fans kind of laughed when they saw what the Colts paid him, but there's still examples of good tape of him defending the run. You just got to kind of get that fire lit under his ass probably a little bit, where things have just gone so south with the Jets. So maybe a change of scenery will get that from Clemens. There's no reason he can't be a really good heavy-handed edge player again. And return value-ish on that contract. But he's got to get back to earlier career Clemens, not what he was the last couple of years. So it's a little bit of a risky contract, but it's not like they gave him a ton of money either. And then you got these two rookies that I don't know how much we'll see from them. You know, Caden Curry, I think is ahead of George Gums on the depth chart this year. You know, he's a higher floor prospect, really profiles almost like a step down from what Tuimoloau was coming out of Ohio State, where it's, you know, okay, he's pretty physically capped out, but he's carved his way into the rotation at Ohio State, which is not easy to do. He's good with his hands. He's a high effort run defender, has a lot of that savviness to him. So you're not going to need him to rotate in year one, but eventually maybe he can do that for you. And then George Gums was like total classic, like Chris Ballard, RAS type of pick, someone that's very new to edge. I'm pretty sure he was a wide receiver at a point for Florida or someone else. Was something I learned on draft day, was a note on him that I didn't know when I watched his tape, but it definitely added some good context to his tape where he was pretty bad, but he tested well, right? So there's a whole developmental trajectory for him. He's got a good guy in Arden Key to kind of pick his brain, because Key was kind of that idea coming out. But yeah, there's your edge group. Pretty standard combination of a pair of early down options with a a middling pass rushing specialist type in Arden Key. And then you really are hoping Latu, who right now profiles as a really good number 2, like you're hoping he can take that step to be more of a number 1. And if he can do that, and if DeForest Buckner can stay healthy, this is going to be closer to a top 10 defensive line for the Colts. That's pretty unlikely that both those things happen. The worst case is Latu is what he was last year, and Buckner is unavailable. And this is just honestly a pretty bad D-line that maybe even holds the Colts back this season. So the Buckner thing really is that important. But let's go to the next level, which is another wild card for this defense and the Colts, with a young linebacker room spearheaded by second-round pick C.J. Allen coming in the draft, along with Bryce Betcher, a fourth-round pick out of Oregon, and Akeem Davis-Gaither coming over from Arizona as the veteran presence there. But they said goodbye to both starters from last year, Zaire Franklin, who's been a mainstay as an adequate run defense-oriented linebacker for them, and then Jermaine Pratt, who found his way back with Lou Anarumo and played some decent ball last year. It's a moderate loss. Now, I like C.J. Allen as a draft pick. Davis-Gaither and Betcher are decent additions. I did say neutral at linebacker. It's close to being a downgrade. I'm not so naive that I'm going to sit here and act like losing Zaire Franklin and Jermaine Pratt are irreplaceable losses. But it does, put a little pressure on a rookie linebacker, which can obviously be challenging. But let's start there with C.J. Allen as we dive into this linebacker room. Just as with any rookie linebacker, it's very challenging to expect too much. I am on the record saying linebacker is certainly the hardest position for a rookie on the defensive side of the ball. it's still hard to make a case that it's harder to play linebacker than quarterback as a rookie. But with all the hand-holding and scheming and a lot of the rules that lean towards making things easier on these quarterbacks, there isn't even an argument to be made that linebacker is even harder to play than quarterback for a young player, where all these offenses are literally specifically targeting you through play action and RPOs. And the way that these offenses are focusing on attacking the middle of the field nowadays, not to mention you're in this era of a lot of nickel defenses trying to defend 12 personnel from a physical command. It is just so much on the plate of these linebackers. It's almost an impossible ask. And there's a reason that so many highly drafted linebackers have disappointed and so few have stood out earlier in their career. It's why it's such a testament to someone like Carson Schwechender doing what he did last year. So it's impossible to rank CJ Allen all that high. Like, he gets a 70 rating for me coming in. But I like the draft pick. I like the trajectory. And I think for a guy that showed the right run diagnostics and the right mentality to stop the run in a Georgia defense against the SEC, was the green dot player. And as far as like rookie linebacker evaluation goes, the idea of him handling a lot in the run game, especially right away, he projects better in that, out the gate than a lot of linebackers I've discussed. And my pro comp on CJ Allen is Nick Bonito. He's a little bit shorter. He's not that great of an athlete. He's a little slower. He's a little bit stiffer. But God, does he just kind of get it? So that's the best case scenario, is what Nick Bonito has been for the Kansas City Chiefs. Does it happen right away? It's improbable, but possible. I'm more concerned about him from a coverage perspective. Just like there was certainly times even at Georgia where like he didn't fully know what he was looking for. Like the zone IQ still needs to get ramped up. There was definitely some good moments. Like when he saw it, he really saw it, and he was able to, make a beeline for some underneath throws and have a little bit of pass, some moments in pass coverage for sure. I was underwhelmed by him as a blitzer. I really think the lack of juice shows up with him in terms of like really hitting the hole hard. But the more and more I watched CJ Allen, the more I liked him. At first, I was kind of like, I even tweeted it. I was like, he's getting like top 40 hype. Like, what's the kind of selling point on CJ Allen? And it took me some time, but when you the amount of times you see him just like take on blocks with just ideal stack peek shed technique, pound for pound, he's incredibly strong. Like, he gets up and under you and it's just boom, stack, peek, shed, make a play. That was Nick Bonito coming out. That's CJ Allen. That's the dream. He's just got to go out and prove it. And then you have Akeem Davis-Gaither, who's theoretically a decent complement to a player like that. That's a little more like of a dog, pun unintended, played at Georgia, but more of a dog between the tackles. Akeem Davis-Gaither, more of a, undersized kind of, I guess, coverage-oriented guy, but weak side backer, like pursuit from space, like ideally that kind of fit. He comes in, he's reunited with Lou Anarumo, so you have that like familiarity. And honestly, I like this because last offseason, I thought this was an incredibly predictable free agent signing. Davis-Gaither was a free agent for the first time last offseason. I was stunned that he didn't go to Indy that needed linebackers. They figured that out here. So I like that that's being reunited. And maybe you could argue for the green up arrow there, but it's not like Davis-Gaither was like even a starter or a superstar for the Bengals. It's just they're familiar. But anyway, he's familiar with the defense and, in terms of at least helping CJ Allen along a little bit, like with what we described is a very complex defensive system that asks everything of all of their players. Davis-Gaither has that experience, at least learning that defense. He was okay for the Cardinals. He's not a complete liability. He's got good speed to the ball. He's got decent diagnostics at this point. He's got some stuff to like in coverage, but he kind of is what he is as a Band-Aid signing. Until proven otherwise, he's still technically in that breakout range for a late day 2, early day 3 athletic developmental based linebacker. But the clock's kind of ticking on that mid-career breakout to happen for him. And if he struggles, you have Bryce Betcher, which this is the double dip strategy that I love. I praise the double dip strategy for GMs all the time. Bryce Betcher is, in so many ways, the scouting report reads very similar to CJ Allen. Allen was a better prospect. That's why he goes, 2 rounds earlier. But his tape certainly was not bad at Oregon. He was good to the ball. He was pretty good at taking on blocks. Not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy. He's going to have his physical limitations. But certainly as future depth, as a backup and a decent special teamer, pretty solid draft pick. But there's a chance that Bryce Betcher is a decent surprise as just a solid, steady, balanced kind of linebacker. I didn't hate his tape, so it was a good 4th round pick. Maybe he ends up getting in the mix here. Jalen Carley's is still theoretically fascinating. Was a athletic safety that converted, but he maybe was going to have an opportunity to play more last year, and that just didn't come to fruition. So his ship has probably sailed, unless he really surprises. And then they also have Austin Ajike. I don't know how to pronounce that necessarily, but he did play a little bit last year. Probably a special teams presence that might be in the mix here. But that is your Colts linebacker room. Obviously, that's going to come in ranked pretty low for how we discuss these guys, with CJ Allen, especially with everything to come and improve. And that ranking for me is 30th for overall linebacker, 28th to 30th for run defense, 31st for coverage. There's a path for this to be a pretty decent linebacker room immediately. And there's also a path for this unit to really struggle. Kind of like, it's obviously not Lou Anarumo's defense anymore, but Demetrius Knight Jr. was pretty fun 2nd round pick that maybe someday we'll get there. But you look at the Bengals linebacker room last year, you had a 2nd round rookie really have his struggles, and it really held that defense back in many ways. So you're hoping it doesn't reach that level. Hopefully CJ Allen brings a certain floor, but you just don't know that till you see it, really. But let's go to the Colts secondary, which is a really fascinating aspect of this team to finish the roster breakdown with, because they get their entire secondary back, theoretically. Sauce Gardner, this trade happens midseason, and the Colts have been slammed for it. Obviously, with the way the season ended last year, I understood the trade at the time. I really did, but at this point in time, it's backfiring. They got a path, though, to get things back on track. But I think what does get lost in the sauce, man, is this just because I became a dad 3 weeks ago? Is that why I'm having all these amazing puns? But it got lost in the sauce that he only played 17% of snaps for the Colts last year. I think people think he just I really think this, maybe this is insulting to a lot of NFL fans, but I really think people think they traded for Sauce and he just sucked. He hardly played. They traded for him and he played in 4 games and really only 2 of them were full games. So it's almost like trading 2 first-round picks for Sauce Gardner. He's been on pre-order until this season, and now they get him. So that's massive. And then you have the Charvarius Ward dynamic. We'll get into that, but he played 39% of snaps last year, and it's completely up in the air what they get from him. We'll dive that down. That's yellow coded for me because it's just hard to know if they even get 39% of snaps from Charvarius Ward. And then they also get Justin Wally, who was a 3rd round pick in 2025, who we don't know much about, but they're excited about him as their starting slot. So that's 3 players back into the secondary, and especially in the case of Sauce Gardner, a massive addition. Kenny Moore held down the slot for them last year, was still okay, but he's still a pending free agent for a reason. He's a regressing vet in the slot. Moderate loss, but I said massively upgraded at cornerback. And then you look at their safety room, and I ultimately said neutral here. They lose Nick Cross in free agency, who's slowly developed, but was still pretty inconsistent for the Colts, especially in coverage. And they draft A.J. Halsey in the 3rd round. Really nice, promising 3rd round pick there. And then they also get another fun rookie back. Hunter Waller missed all of last season. It was a 7th round pick, but was a steal, in my opinion, of a 7th round pick. And there's been some early noise about him. So I said neutral at safety, but definitely reasons to be excited that this Colts secondary could really come together this year, but it's a massive wild card. The Colts really do, between Daniel Jones, DeForest Buckner, and now this secondary, they have some of the biggest wild card, like pivotal factors that could really go amazing in one direction or train wreck in a different direction. They got some of the biggest wild cards of any team this season. Now, honestly, in my mind, Sauce Gardner isn't so much a wild card. When you really boil it down and filter through all the noise, I still feel really good about Sauce Gardner playing for this team and playing at a really high level. Even if that isn't the first 2 years of his career, where he was on an absolute heater, was in perfect coverage, like some of the best 2 years of cornerback tape we've seen in a long time. We've gotten a little bit further removed from that at a volatile cornerback position to say, like, okay, maybe he's not quite going to play at that level. But I still think there's justification in trading a pair of first-round picks for this guy whose coverage tape has still been fantastic. And he was really good in the 2 games he played for the Colts last year. So, like, even if it's been, you know, a kind of a rocky moment in his career where the 2024 Jets season was his hope, I would be pretty surprised if that doesn't go down as the worst year of his career, at least of his prime. And he was still a solid corner. He just wasn't able to live up to the unbelievable expectations that got placed on him after his first 2 years, where he was undoubtedly like the best cornerback in the NFL. But it's not like that was just a fluke either, right? And I don't think this is an injury-prone player. It's maybe an injury-prone position. That much is true. But I expect he's going to be fully healthy and locked and loaded. And there's a baseline of a guy that has great length, pretty good speed. He's the right amount of physical. Like, I think of these long, like, kind of physical corners. If you can keep it between like 5 and 10 penalties in a season, that's a comfort area for me, because you're playing with the right physicality and grabbiness that you would honestly coach your cornerbacks to play with, but you're not relying on it, and you're savvy enough for it to not derail your coverage. And in his 4 years in the league, he's gone 5 penalties, 10 penalties, which was that 2024 season. They flagged him a little bit more, and then back to 5 last year. Granted, that was more consistent with the penalty rate of 2024, but has never gone over 10 penalties in a season. So I like that aspect of his game. People give corners crap for being grabby. It's like, no, that's how they coach it. That's what you want, is a guy to play physical. You can't go over the line with it. You got to know the balance, and he does. He's got incredible anticipation from any type of zone assignment. That's why Lou Anarumo greenlit this. He's like, you're telling me we can get one of the best corners in the NFL that can play bump and run coverage, that is like high IQ and awesome from any zone. Like, I can run cover 2 and he will shove the wide receiver to the bench and play that with perfect technique. We can play him in press, off zone, cover 3, cover 4, you name it. That's ideal for a Lou Anarumo system. So I'm pretty damn confident that Sauce is going to be borderline worth it for the Colts. It's similar to like all these aggressive big trades. It's like, that's a big price to pay. The way you make that worth it is by picking in the 20s and making sure that pick that's going to the Jets isn't going to be like Arch Manning, right? Like, that's more of the is it worth it aspect of the conversation, as opposed to like, is the player worth it? I do think so. So like, I'm really excited about him getting a chance to honestly prove a lot of people wrong and be a just absolute superstar here. Where I'm much less confident is with Charvarius Ward. Quite possibly the biggest roller coaster, honestly, of emotions and just tape and just of a career the last 2 years. I feel so bad for Charvarius Ward, dude. This guy has been the most unlucky player in the NFL, I think, for the last 2 years. He goes through this horrible tragedy in 2024 where he loses his baby daughter in the middle of the season. And I mean, especially now that I have a daughter, like that, the thought of that in the middle of an NFL season, the fact that his tape like showed a corner that was just not the same player that year. And he talked about how like I had to get out of San Francisco because just like driving to work brought those memories back. Like unbelievably tragic, horrible experience for him. And then he goes to Indy and is like thrilled about the new opportunity, thrilled that like a team bet on him after he went through it. Like what a great feeling. Like, you know, you're an aging corner and put up bad tape. Like it could have been so easy for the NFL to just like say, no, you're washed now. We're not going to pay you a bunch of money. But the Colts gave him like a nope, we're going to bet on you to like come back, be a CB1, get back to being, you know, he was a top 10 corner just a couple years ago. You know, he gets that good energy back in his life. And he goes through a year where he gets 3 concussions, including a pregame concussion that we talked about with Zach Hicks, like unbelievably unfortunate. So this dude has been through it, man. It's just terrible. That the one thing you can say is when he played, he was great. He was the old Shavarius Ward, and that's what makes this so much harder. If he played last year and it was like 2024 and he struggled again, I'd be pretty much dismissing this. And the Colts honestly would probably be dismissing it. But it's like, dude, he was Shavarius Ward last year. He was locked in. He just got fucked by concussions. So it reminds me a little bit of like Chris Olave coming off of that 1 year where it's like, is he going to be okay? Physically, like neck down, I think he's in a pretty good spot to actually get back and play at a really high level. And if you get something close to peak Shavarius Ward and now Sauce is here, holy shit, that is like no conversation about it. The best true cornerback duo in the NFL. Sorry, Eagles fans, like, love what you guys got. Different conversation with DeJean being more of a slot, but like outside cornerback duo, if Ward gets back to that, the Colts have something no team has, period. And I'm sorry, Texans fans, like in this division, I know they're not going to like to hear that either. Like peak Shavarius Ward is just better than Kamari Lassiter. I'm sorry, he is. Are we likely to get that scenario? It feels like no, but concussions are just so hard to know. And it would have been so easy for Shavarius Ward to just retire, but he doesn't. So where is he at with the concussions? Where are doctors at with him? It's a total wild card, right? Obviously, I get pretty excited about the theory of having both those guys, though. And then Justin Wally is another total wild card. A third round, really rookie. They drafted him third round. I'm a Gophers fan. Justin Wally was hardly on my radar. I was very surprised they spent a third round pick on him. They really like him and are all but giving him this slot corner job. He still is going to have to, fully, prove that he's healthy and win this job. But that's really what's expected is we're going to get to see him in his first year in the bigs. Shrug, right? Like, I don't know. I thought he was kind of a dime a dozen day 3 corner prospect, but they really believe in him. And the fact that we're still past an injury and they still are reinforcing that belief in him it says a lot. But I thought he just had a pretty balanced profile in terms of size, run defense, coverage. I thought he kind of profiled as a balanced backup type. We'll see like what he can prove to have here. Now, if he can't go and if Ward's unavailable, they are rightfully so stocking this cornerback room with some playable depth. You have Mekhi Blackmon, who had to play a bunch last year. You don't want him starting. He's very inconsistent, but as a NFL backup corner, he profiles now into that role. He can play a little inside, outside. Cam Taylor-Britt, same story. Like between these two players, you have no idea who you're getting on a week-to-week basis, but you might get a really good performance from either Cam Taylor-Britt or Mekhi Blackmon, or he might lose you the game. It's kind of in that range. You got a couple of those guys. Cameron Mitchell has some traits, has played a little bit. He deserves to be on an NFL depth chart. Jalen Jones is also fascinating to me. He's really been derailed from health after looking like a pretty solid playmaking number 2 cornerback. Not someone with the lockdown coverage ability to be a number one, but really good ball skills and instincts and anticipation at the position. But he's had injuries and is honestly regressing a little bit too early in his career. And then Jonathan Edwards had to play last year. It was a disaster, but he's going to compete for a roster spot. So like between those really top 4 names in terms of depth, competition breeds excellence. Could you end up with one of these guys surprising? It's hard to know exactly who that would be. I would say Jalen Jones is probably the most fascinating to me. But it's, as far as NFL cornerback depth, these guys, like it's better than most teams have there, which you would damn well hope is going to be the case when you don't know what you're getting from Charvarius Ward and even Justin Wally there. Now, the safety room feels much more stable. I mean, Cam Bynum was a really great signing. It's, I thought this was an overpay at first, but the more and more I watch Cam Bynum, the more I just kind of get it. Like, there's just only so many true free safeties like Cam Bynum that are playmakers enough and steady enough as a tackler to just raise the floor of the back end of your defense as like the goalie. You've been watching a lot of World Cup, like as the goalie for your defense. I think he's proved to be a really nice piece. He'll make, every 3 weeks, he'll make a really nice read and a nice play. He's got good ball skills when the ball, when quarterbacks do make mistakes and the ball's in his area. But he's just a really nice, steady piece back there. And then AJ Halsey, I love this draft pick. I think so much about Von Bell in that Bengals defense, who had a really good year in that Super Bowl season for Lou Anarumo and that defense. So much of that in AJ Halsey, where he's stocky, he's very stiff, he's very unlikely to be anything more than at best like an average coverage safety. You can tell like he can't really match the snappy route breaks. If you're running quarters or you want to man guys up, like he's going to have his limitations in that sense, but he's not a liability. And he does have like long speed to get himself, have some range and playmaking ability at times. But just as like, he loves to hit and absolutely has the stopping power to back it up. He can take on blocks at the line of scrimmage. He's got a really nice floor coming into the league as a box safety. And when Cam Bynum is your true free safety, he's your Jesse Bates in that defense. Not quite as good, but from a role perspective. And then you got your Von Bell. Like if you're going to get into cover 3, that's how that rotation's going to look. And great. And you might have just enough deep speed to occasionally rotate AJ Halsey as the single high guy, just to keep offenses guessing a little bit. But I love the draft pick. He's got to go out and prove it for sure. But I see a pretty damn high floor, and I'd be pretty surprised if AJ Halsey doesn't just like cleanly win this job and pencil in as a Chuck Clark, a Von Bell, archetype thumping strong safety. Malik Mustafa is another guy that he reminded me of a little bit. Now, if for some reason he really sucks in that role, Hunter Waller's really fascinating to me. Like I loved his tape at Wisconsin. I thought he had a ton of nastiness around the box, decent speed and like playmaking ability. Like he's limited, like in the same way AJ Halsey's limited, but like the idea of him is pretty similar. But Waller has even been flirted with the idea of like maybe just becoming a linebacker. I think Waller's fascinating, like what you could maybe do with 3 safety defenses. I wouldn't be stunned, especially if like if Ward gets hurt and maybe they want to kick like Justin Wally outside, or if Wally's like really struggling. Wouldn't be stunned if Lou Anarumo, the flexible defensive coach he is like, you know what, let's just go with like a big base, Waller as the kind of weak side, like star defender, do the big nickel thing. I really like him in that role, and then have Halsey and Bynum behind him. Like I could absolutely see that being a nice insurance policy for this defense. So definitely like him coming back from injury. You got some veteran, like, more special teams based guys, Wanye Thomas, Jonathan Owens. Daniel Scott is like theoretically fascinating. Good coverage tape in his final year at Cal, but it's been 3 straight years not being able to get on the field for the Colts. Like the poor guy just can't stay healthy, but the fact that he's still here speaks to the fact that he can play some football, theoretically speaking, if he could turn the injury sliders off. But yeah, another unit where it's like, okay, how do we rank this secondary? Exactly. You've got the Charvarius Ward factor, and you got a pair of, rookies, basically, that we haven't seen play. Like, how do you actually rank this secondary? It's really challenging. It's That's why it's a true wild card here. But they came out top 10, 9th to 10th for secondary, and same thing with quarterback. Like, it could threaten top 5. It really could. If Halsey's a stud and Ward is healthy, that's really all it takes to say this could be a top 5 secondary in the league. Even if Wally struggles a little bit, if Wally's awesome, this could be up there with the best secondaries in the league. But obviously there's, a couple rookies struggle. Ward's unavailable. You got some weak links. You're probably closer to like bottom 12 or so. So it's a wide range of potential outcomes here to round out the last position group for the Colts and round out our defensive conversation on this team. So they came out to me with all these different questions. They came out as the 23rd ranked defense. Really a difficult unit to project for so many different reasons. But they came in for me 23rd for overall defense, 18th for pass defense, so a little better of a projection in that phase, and then 27th in run defense. Having that many questions at linebacker is going to drag you down a little bit. Obviously, you got injury questions with the front and the secondary. You've got youth questions with CJ Allen. It's just so many different directions this could go for a defensive coordinator that's pretty polarizing. Like, could the Colts be a top 10 defense this year? I don't have a doubt saying that's possible. Could they be bottom 8, bottom 4? I think that's possible too. It is going to be really fascinating to see how this defense finishes. And that's probably an underrated aspect of this Colts team, is like, you spend so much time thinking about how big of a wild card Daniel Jones is, as you should, that you kind of lose sight of like just how much uncertainty there is with this defense, good and bad. But before we get to the interview with Zach and then finish the video having some fun with my, taking a look at the schedule and predictions and some superlative awards, let's talk some special teams. So the Colts came out pretty favorable with their special teams. They graded out really well per PFF and DVOA last year. Last year, they were 4th in DVOA, 12th per PFF team grade. They've got some questions with the kicker. They have an ongoing position battle. There's a pretty good chance they settle with a decent kicker. Both Spencer Schrader and Blake Grupe have been just like okay over the last couple of years. We'll see who ends up emerging through that. Grupe was probably the favorite. But right now, just according to our lads, they've got Schrader ahead of them, but like true competition with the kicker. That left them ranked roughly 21st for the kicker grade. You got a good punter in Rigoberto Sanchez. And you have a young returner that's still pretty unproven in Anthony Gould, who's like reliable, but not like particularly fast. So maybe not the best returner to have back there. Overall, though, they came out as the 14th projected special teams heading into next season. And then I also want to do a little recap here with my strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors Venn diagram, where the Colts are fascinating. I do think they have probably the most impressive list of strengths that we've done in this series so far. I do think the offensive coaching is something I will stand behind with Shane Steichen. It's a reason I was higher on this Colts team last year. They were making me look right until the injuries and the train fell off the rails. I'm willing to put at least the offensive coaching from Shane Steichen as a strength. Offensive line, definitely a strength. I don't think you can argue with that. And that's considering they have even more upside and not a ton of downside. Obviously, Jalen Travis, a big deal at right tackle, but running back, Jonathan Taylor speaks for himself. And then the secondary snuck in there. Maybe that's overly optimistic with how we broke that unit down, but they did come in as a top 10 ranked secondary for me. So listing that as a strength, but obviously with the wild cards as well, the pivotal factors, secondary, we don't need to beat a dead horse here, but that could easily be removed from being a strength. Defensive line, especially DeForest Buckner, like crazy wild card. That's one of the most important players on this football team. What his health and play at his age with his record of injuries at this point looks like is a wild card to say the least. And then obviously, you guys are smart. Like Daniel Jones is, as I said earlier, the prominent wild card for the Colts, but for the league. Like he could swing so much into like the landscape of the AFC with everything we discussed with him. And then for weaknesses, it's a pretty short list, honestly. Linebacker that is just young. Like that could be a non-weakness if CJ Allen's good, and then you just don't have any definitive weaknesses. Like, there really is so much to like with this Colts team, but they need some injury luck, man. It's honestly, at the end of the day, like, you could put, hospital bills in there with the weaknesses. But let's get Zach Hicks in here for his wonderful insight covering the Colts. Really, Zach's there for all things Colts. He's been, honestly, a legendary deep dive guest at this point. I got to go back and see how many years it's been. He will remind you at the end of the interview, like, where you can find his stuff. But Locked On Colts, writes for the Colts for SI. Like, again, just all things Colts, covering them there. But let's roll the interview with Zach. And now I'm super thrilled to welcome back to the Colts Deep Dive, Zach Hicks. It's good to see you. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. I mean, all things considered, right? With how the Colts ended last season, you can only be so good, obviously. But I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Glad to be back for sure. About to have some fun here.
Absolutely. It wouldn't be a Colts Deep Dive without Zach Hicks. So let's get into it. Let's start with kind of the big overarching question for me with this Colts team pertains to, like, Shane Steichen in a big year, I think. And I wanted to get your opinion on, like, just how much of a kind of hot seat season you think this is for Shane Steichen. Obviously, Kelly Irsay steps into her role last year with the team, and then they win, they trade for Sauce, they hit full send, everything goes off the rails. Where are we at heading into year 4 for Shane Steichen? Do they have to make the playoffs this year, or maybe do they like him so much that you could see a world that maybe even if they do miss the playoffs, that he would still be around?
Yeah, it's such a tough spot when you have that coach like Shane Steichen, because I think you and I can both agree, and I think a lot of people can agree too, is just Shane Steichen is just that type of coach that you think can work out for sure, right? He's a young offensive mind who consistently changes his system to fit his quarterback, and he maximizes what he's given. Almost had them in the playoffs with Gardner Minshew in 2023. Got good production out of Joe Flacco even in 2024. The best year that we've ever seen from Daniel Jones for the first half of last year before the injury. And then even, retired Phillip Rivers coming out and looking really good in his system for a couple games. Like, there are so many good ingredients there with Shane Steichen. But unfortunately, with the way that the NFL is built, like, you have to have some semblance of success. I think Carly Ursay-Gordon is, like, hoping for any reason to keep him. I think she's a huge fan of Shane Steichen, but it would be hard to make that case to your fan base if you had 4 straight seasons of him as a head coach where he missed the playoffs, even if you weren't like a bottom feeder throughout that whole stretch. Players and fans and everyone just hates being in that middle and not being a playoff team. And I just think it would be really hard to make the case for him if it's 4 straight years missing the playoffs, even though, again, if you want to make excuses for him, his day one starting quarterback, if you look at all 3 seasons, has played less than half the games for the Colts the last 3 years. Their starter, like with Richardson, and then even last year with Jones played a little over half. They've had a lot of injuries at the quarterback position, and it's hard to overcome that. And I think a lot to remember early in Kyle Shanahan's tenure with the 49ers, right? Like, every time they lost Garoppolo, who kept getting hurt, they would win like 3 or 4 games, and they'd be one of the worst teams in football. I think it kind of speaks to Steichen that they keep losing their quarterbacks, and they're still like on the fringe of the playoffs every single year. So it would be really hard to fire him, I think. And I think he's that kind of coach where he would go to his second place and be a head coach somewhere else and have immense success, because I think there's just so many good things about him. But ultimately, I think that it's just hard to just hand wave away 4 straight years without making the playoffs. Yeah. So I do think it's a bit do or die for him, especially for Chris Ballard. I mean, I think it should even be more so for Chris Ballard. That
was going to be my follow-up.
Yeah, right. Like with Ballard, it's been the whole time I've covered the team, he's been the general manager. He's actually been the general manager longer than I've covered the team. He took over in 2017. Crazy. I started covering them in 2018. So he's been with this team forever. I think it's do or die for both those guys this year, though.
Okay. So big part of this is obviously Daniel Jones. So I guess the big question here is, like, how legit do you feel like he kind of is heading into this year? Last year was kind of polarizing. Like, most of his play was pretty good. Then it was kind of like, there was some writing on the wall, in my opinion, that he maybe was going to regress. And then we didn't get to even really discover that because he gets hurt. Now he's coming off an Achilles tear. What's your confidence level in just kind of what level quarterback play they can get from him this year.
Yeah, it's so weird because going into last season, like if we would have done this last year, I was so anti Daniel Jones and that signing and bring him in here and being that guy. I didn't like the fit. I didn't like the turnovers. I didn't like because like Daniel Jones had no experience in the type of offense that Shane Steichen ran. I didn't expect Steichen to flip around his entire offensive system to make it fit Daniel Jones. And then the start they had last year, where he was a bona fide top 7 quarterback in football for the first half of the season. Honestly, that might be lowballing it. He was playing some great ball. And then whenever the broken leg happened, there's some speculation it could have happened in the Steelers game. I think it probably happened late in the Atlanta game. And then he took it into the bye week. We heard during the bye week that he broke his leg. So then he played a couple games on the broken leg and then tore his Achilles after that. And now you're kind of looking at it like, okay, we got some really good play out of him early last season. Like almost every advanced number from last year, he was a top 10 quarterback in the league. But now he's coming off one of the most devastating injuries in the sport, which is that Achilles tear. Now, the one kind of positive to that is we don't have a lot of data on quarterback coming off Achilles injuries, especially at his age. Mostly the guys who go through this are where Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers, who were a little bit older. Dan Marino was still kind of Dan Marino when he came back from his, because he
40 years ago too. Like, yeah.
And he is Dan Marino too. Like, you don't want to compare someone to Dan Marino, right? Like that's, it's impossible to make that comparison. But aside from that, we just don't have many comparisons. So I'm kind of optimistic, like cautiously optimistic that he can recover from this, because we just don't have much data either way, but you really just got to see it. I think that there are a lot of things in place with this offense, with, again, the continuity of Shane Steichen. I think they're going to have a pretty good offensive line again, where I think Daniel Jones can be in a situation where he can find similar success. Maybe not to the crazy highs that they had last year, but like you said in your questions that you sent me, like a top 20 quarterback, like I think that's very fair to expect that from him. It's what the Colts certainly need him to be if they want to be a playoff team this year. So I certainly think they can get that out of him. It's just there's so much up in the air with the coming off the Achilles injury, with his past production in this league, and also just the injuries in general in his career, right? Like, are you going to get 17 games out of Daniel Jones when nobody really has in his career? So I do think there's a lot of questions there, but can he be a top 20 quarterback? Can he be a top 15 quarterback? I think he absolutely can, with the type of system they have, with the coach they have, with the offensive line I think that they're going to have this year too. It's just the injuries are such a big question mark right now.
I didn't send this on the list to you before we sat down, but do you, and we can kind of keep this one short, but do you think Richardson's like on this team? Like, that's because there's been some noise about him maybe wanting to be traded or whatever. Like, do you think he's on the week 1 roster? And I think everybody knows like he's super talented and maybe it clicks, but probably won't. But just as a matter of like him in that locker room, is he kind of locked in, like trying for this year, or is there still some, maybe some noise about him being unhappy here?
Yeah, I don't think Chris Ballard's just going to give him away because that is the guy Ballard took in the top 5 of that draft. It's hard to give him away, especially when he's his age, right? He's only 24 years old. Like, he's still fairly young in this league too. So I don't think Ballard wants to give him away, but I do think Shane Steichen's fully committed to going into this season with Jones and Leonard as the top 2 guys. And also the Colts are going to be paying out a big chunk of what Richardson is due here in early August. So it would make facilitating a trade a lot easier here come early August. So I do think ultimately they do get a deal done, but if they don't, I think he'd be like their 3rd quarterback, their guy that they would have as like the healthy scratch on game days. And because remember, a lot of coaches, they like to have the backup quarterback having that like synergy with the starter. Riley Leonard and Daniel Jones have known each other for a decade plus at this point. They both went to Duke, recruited by the same guy to go to Duke. It's kind of like having a second Daniel Jones in that locker room. So I think that's what Shane Steichen likes. But again, with the injury history that they have in that quarterback room, it wouldn't hurt to have Richardson as your 3rd quarterback, just a guy who can kind of play at least, right? Like, you don't want to go to Seth Hennigan or Kyle Slaughter. I don't know. So anybody you want to throw out there, whoever 3rd quarterback would be in the NFL.
It's kind of a bummer that he's not more like making it work here, because I actually feel like this is probably his best opportunity, like around the league. Like, I don't know. But I want to come back to Shane Steichen for a second here, just as you kind of dive into Colts film and stuff. What are maybe 2 or 3 things that really just like catch your eye, just like creative things that you love that he does? It could be player usage or certain play tendencies, just stuff that's kind of caught your eye for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most notable thing was just when he came to Indy, he had one very specific style of offense, and that was running that Oklahoma version of an NFL offense with Jalen Hurts, the RPO heavy. We're going to spread the ball out. We're going to have like 5 receivers in the formation and just have these quick options for Jalen Hurts. And when he came to Indy, he tried to get that going with Richardson. And then when Richardson got hurt, Gardner Minshew already knew that style of offense, right? So they're running that Oklahoma, like every single run play is an RPO. Every single like quick pass is going to be 5 receiver empty personnel set. We're going to be 1 or 2 in the NFL in empty personnel. And then to see the changes that he has made each and every year from going into 2024, they wanted to get a little bit more under center. They instituted a lot more QB runs with Richardson, studying college offenses like Liberty and Ole Miss to really find some more QB runs in there for Richardson. And then the drastic shift again going into this next season where they get Daniel Jones in here though. And with Daniel Jones, they're like, hey, we're looking at Shanahan offense. We're looking at McVay offense. We're looking at Seattle, what they're doing with their offense there. And we're going to run this like 12 personnel play action offense that takes advantage of defenses that way. Obviously, drafting Tyler Warren was a big part of that change as well. They had their number 1 tight end. But them coming out as this like under center 12 personnel offense was the biggest shock in the world for me. Because I thought, like Shane Steichen, you've been so much into this RPO stuff. And he just went away from it completely last year. They still did a little bit of RPO and short yardage stuff, but drastically changed their approach on offense, and it led to the best season that he has coached and Daniel Jones's best career season as well. So just that chameleon aspect was something that we loved when the Colts hired him, but you really got to see it last year. And then another aspect I really love about him is just how he maximizes each individual player with what they do best, right? Like what you'll see with Josh Downs, for instance, and you watched a lot of stuff going into this breakdown here. A lot of what Josh Downs runs is just option routes, right? Like he's just going to run, you're going to go 5 yards, you're going to stem, and then you're going to read the leverage of the defender and break a certain way. And when we get to 3rd downs, when we get to, 4th downs or like got to have it moments in the red zone, we're just going to only look at Josh Downs. We're going to motion him, get him right leverage, let him run his option route and get him the football. It's maybe predictable, but also like, it's like having Kyle Korver shoot a 3 for you. Like, okay, cool. We're gonna have our guy shoot a 3. Like, or like Alec Pierce, right? Like everyone knows you're gonna target him on the vertical plane. So stop it then. Like try to stop it.
Right.
Then. We're gonna have Tyler Warren in the backfield as a fullback. We're probably gonna run it, but try to stop the run play with Jonathan Taylor running behind Tyler Warren. So I think just the way that he maximizes players, it's kind of like. You have this guy who is such a great schemer of offensive design and just in putting playbooks together, but sometimes simplicity is all that matters, right? Like simplicity of like, I'm going to get the ball to Josh Downs in the short yardage game. I'm going to get the ball to Alec Pierce on the vertical plane. We're going to feed Jonathan Taylor at the end of games when we have a slight lead because he's Jonathan Taylor, like just those simplistic elements. I think has just really helped him with his offensive system and why they were able to score so many points early last season.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, I wanted to ask you about Tyler Warren because his season kind of like trickled away a little bit, and obviously Daniel Jones gets hurt, and that's going to be the easy answer and probably the right answer. But I was curious if you saw anything kind of as I don't know that I would say he struggled, but the first like half of the year, he was offensive rookie of the year favorite. I'm pretty sure he was on pace for about 1,000 yards. Certainly wasn't that for the second half of the year there. What did you, if anything, did you see anything usage wise or, player teams maybe caught on to what he was doing, or did his play dip in certain areas? Was there any reason for a drop in production and maybe somewhere he could improve for next year? Yeah,
there's a couple of reasons why I would really point out the drop in production. One is just he had played so many games at Penn State the year before. He was
that's a good point.
The force-fed player in that offense at Penn State, right?
Yeah.
It was 20 targets a game, it felt like, at Penn State. So you come off that long season, and then you're immediately a focal point of your NFL team, right? And they're just riding you through the first 10, 11 weeks. And I do think eventually it did wear him down a little bit. Like, he is an older player for like what he was as a prospect, but he still wasn't really used to that NFL grind. So I think he wore down a little bit. But I think the biggest aspect of all this is when Phillip Rivers came in at quarterback, the offense completely changed overnight. Like, I know the Colts tried to say that they were still running the same offense. They were not under center at all with Phillip Rivers, because Rivers couldn't do 7 steps.
Couldn't get to the handoff.
Right. And so much of what Warren, like, again, the rookie season is always the toughest for youngest players because you get such a shortened off season. You're not really fully in NFL shape because you got to go from combine shape to NFL shape. And you're still trying to understand like the nuances of playing in the NFL. So I think a lot of their plan this year was like, hey, we're going to get a lot of scheme touches for Warren on these play action designs. We're going to leak him out into the flats, get him that run after catch opportunity. You'll have some high-low opportunities where he can catch the ball underneath, but a lot of what we want to do with Warren is just these scheme touches off of play action and dump the ball to him. Well, when you lose Daniel Jones, you don't have play action anymore. Like, Phillip Rivers doing play action out of the gun is not fooling anyone. You're not going to be able to leak Tyler Warren out backside when you're doing stuff like that. So you lost the number one way to target Warren, and then just getting that new synergy with another quarterback overnight is tough. So I do think there's some real reasons why his play fell off a little bit. I do think he rebounded pretty well. Like, he had a 1 month lull in there when Jones was banged up and then Rivers first came in, where Warren did not look like the same tight end. And then I thought the last 3 games he looked like himself again. So it's like he hit that wall, climbed over it, and I thought he finished fairly well to end the season. So it's about just, refining his body, making sure he's in NFL shape this next season. I think continually getting better as a blocker. There were some good moments last year, but just making those good moments more consistent. And then, just working on the route running still a little bit. Like, he's like a Tucker Kraft, a Jeremy Shockey type player, right? Where he's like this big, imposing physical player, but you want to see a little bit more fluidity, I think, in his game. So there are some areas that he can improve, but I mean, we're talking about he's a top 10 tight end in the league already, a target hog in the passing game, can play a fullback, can play a tight end, can be a move or an inline guy. Like, he brings a big positive impact to this Colts team. So I'm not worried about him at all, but as a young player, there's always areas you can be a little bit better.
For sure. Speaking of young players, I got to ask you about Jalen Travis, because they let Braden Smith go. Travis started 5 games at the end of the year last year, 4th round pick, Iowa State. I think he's a Minnesotan, going back to his roots. So shout out the Minnesota Farm Boys. But yeah, what did you see from him? What's your kind of confidence level? A player that he maybe makes me think of a little bit is like Spencer Brown for the Bills is like a best case scenario. Has your mind started to go there, or are you a little more pump the brakes with what you saw last year? The PFF grading on him was pretty favorable, but I know you're in the weeds really watching it. So I had to get your opinion on it.
Yeah, no, I think he had a really good finish to last season. Like, there's some areas to clean up. He's such a big, lumbering player, right? He's 6'9", 330 pounds. Like, leverage is always going to be an issue in his game, right? So it's going to be about how he can combat that going forward, and that's where I think you saw some of his struggles. But, as a 4th round rookie, he basically started 5 games. I know he came in a little bit in that Jaguars game in week 14, but essentially started the final 5 weeks of the year for the Colts. 2 games against Jacksonville, a game against Houston, a game against Seattle, and then he had to switch over to left tackle to play against San Fran as well. So outside of San Fran, you're playing against some of the best edge rushers in football as a 4th round rookie. And he only gave up 1 sack.
Depending who you ask about Trayvon Walker, I suppose. But
right. Okay. But
wink,
even
wink.
then, Josh Hines Allen.
Someone that has his yes, Josh Hines Allen. Someone to be fair, Trayvon Walker has kind of historically killed the Colts. So
yeah. Braden Smith always struggled against him. So I do think Travis had a pretty good game against him. But yeah, Daniil Hunter, Will Anderson. I mean, the 100 players Seattle was throwing out there at the edge that were all great last year. And he held up. I mean, only gave up the 1 sack, 10 pressures in the 168 snaps. Speaking of PFF, he was, I think, a top 25 graded offensive tackle during that stretch, which firmly puts you in starter, plus starter category for them. So yeah, I thought he played really well. I'm still cautiously optimistic because he's going to be a young player. There's going to be some ebbs and flows. I still think in the run game he can get a little bit lower and drive guys a little bit better, but I think he's just going to be a good pass protector in year 1. I think there's going to be a lot of good elements to his game. And kind of one thing I've said about him since the Colts drafted him is he's just too big and too explosive to fail. Like
Yeah.
he's so big and explosive. And you see it on his film. Like the first step is so wicked for a player of his size. And I just like, how are you going to beat that? How are you going to beat him with speed when he's that big and explosive, right? He's going to cut
Yeah.
you off on your angles so
Mhm.
much. So then you have to go through his chest, which again, you're going to get lower than him, but you have to go through 330 pounds of
Yeah.
6'9", 330 pounds. So I'm optimistic about him. I don't expect him to be like, top 20 tackle or Spencer Brown all of a sudden here in year one.
Sure.
But I do expect like good tackle play from him. And the Colts, I mean, historically under Chris Ballard, right? You could say what you want about Chris Ballard, but look at the offensive linemen they have churned out.
Probably what saved his job.
Right. I mean,
what they've been able to keep doing with that.
Yeah, just looking at the line right now, they're all players that he has drafted, right? Their entire starting
Mhm.
offensive line. You got Gonzalez, Bortolini, who I think could be a Pro Bowler this year at center. Obviously, Nelson and Ryman, who are just awesome players. Even before that, though, Will Fries, Braden Smith, Danny Pinter is going to be a starter for the Ravens this year, who the Colts drafted as well. Like,
not saying that much.
Yeah, it's not saying that. But they have got something that works in the O-line. And Tony Soprano Jr. is one of the best O-line coaches in football.
Yeah, totally.
So I fully expect a good season from Jalen Travis. Maybe not like top tier, but again, too big, too explosive to suck. I think he's going to be a good player for the Colts this year.
Nice. All right, let's flip over to the defensive side of things a little bit here. The front seven's always been in Indy just like fine. Like to me, it felt like it's kind of hovered around like roughly the 20th best combination of D-line linebacker for a long time. I don't know that that's necessarily going to change this year, but they made a handful of moves up front from edge to interior to linebacker. What is the addition that you're looking at that you're most excited about that you think can make the most positive impact either at edge, DT, or linebacker?
Yeah, I think the most interesting one for sure is going to be CJ Allen at linebacker, right? I mean, a 21-year-old rookie coming in here and being your Mike linebacker, probably the green dot of your defense here in year one in Lou Anarumo's system, who historically has a very complicated system where he throws a lot at offensive coaches. But if any of these players in this last class, right, at linebacker were capable of handling this, it was going to be CJ Allen, a guy who was the green dot at Georgia the last couple years. Georgia, who doesn't run some simplistic scheme either. So I think he's very capable of it. I love his game. He's my type of linebacker. I'm not sure how you viewed him in this draft class, but I love thumping linebackers that can run.
Yeah.
And I was such a big fan of him and just what he was asked to do at Georgia. So when the Colts got him where they got him and, projects early as a starter for them, I was over the moon about that. So getting a guy like Allen in here to be their starter, I'm pumped. I think he can be an upgrade over Zaire Franklin. Maybe not in year one because Franklin, for all his volatility, did have some really good moments as well. I know Colts fans soured on him for sure. But I think he's going to be a steadier presence than Franklin, right? Maybe lower missed tackles, maybe a few more tackles around the line of scrimmage rather than either in the backfield or 10 yards down the field. I think we could see a little bit more of that steadying presence, which is rare to say about a young rookie starter, but I think that's what the Colts are going for with him. But when it comes to like their other front seven additions, I'm not really over the moon about any of the other. I like Kobe Wooden a lot. I'm excited about Kobe Wooden. I think he can be a really good like run defending 3-tech with a little bit of pass rush upside, but more of like that run defending 3-tech. But
do you know, has he continued to bulk up?
No, they don't want him to go nose tackle. They want him at like 3-tech, like in the 280s or so.
Okay.
Yeah, they were like, he's not playing nose tackle here. Don't worry.
Yeah. And then the other player on defense that I really wanted to ask you about was Shavarius Ward. I mean, went through it the last 2 years, just devastating, like off-field tragedy in San Francisco, and then really bad luck with three concussions last year, right?
Yeah.
Missed a huge chunk of the season. Where should we be at with him, I guess? Like, I think the question is as simple as that.
Yeah, I think we need to add another player to that too, is DeForest Buckner, where the Colts' two highest paid defenders this year, both over 30 years old, and they're both kind of like wild cards for the team, right? Like, what are you going to get out of either of them? With Ward, I mean, the 3 concussions, with the third one, well, I guess it was the second one that was the major one, was the Cardinals one. happened with a freak accident in a pregame warmup where he ran into a player. They were running the drills too close to each other, and he ran.
Yeah, what is going on pregame in Indianapolis,
Yeah.
man? Anthony Richardson breaks his eyeball. Like, geez,
That was
man.
the same game. Remember, like I got a text from a dude who worked for the Colts at the time, and he was like,
Like,
"We need
what
to
is
cancel
going on?"
pregame stuff because what is going on?" So,
That's insanity,
yeah,
dude.
they lost 2 players like that. So Ward had that major injury, which put him on IR for a concussion, which is rare, and he was out for
Right.
like 6 weeks. And then he got another one late in the season, which ended his year. And we were all of the mindset like, dude, just retire. You've had such a hellish last 2 years, man. Like, just retire, like,
Yeah.
right off in the sunset. But he wants to finish on a better note than where he was. And to his credit, I mean, before the first concussion, or I guess before the second concussion at the Cardinals game, he was playing some really good football for the Colts.
Right.
Like, he was, I mean, I think PFF still had him as like a top 10 graded corner last year. It was very limited snaps, but very good
Right.
corner last year when he played, especially I thought against the Rams early in the year. He played some really good ball against Devontae Adams. So yeah, I think that there's still some capability there, but it's just like, how healthy is he going to be? Like, what's he going to look like? Because when he came back from the second concussion late in the year, he didn't look like himself again. And then the third
Sure.
concussion happened again, like after that. So it's really concerning. It's an ultimate wild card, and you don't want your wild card to be being paid as much as he is, to be blunt about it. But it's kind of where they're at with him. And Buckner's in the same boat where it's like that,
Totally.
that neck
Yeah.
injury. He tried to come back for one game late last season against the 49ers, and he did not look like DeForest Buckner in that game. Gets put on IR, and he might not be ready for week 1 this year. So
Sure.
that's probably why they wanted to get Kobe Wooden in that trade with the Packers. So yeah, that's going to be the biggest question with the Colts defense all year is like, they're only as good. You're only as good as your highest paid players and your best players. And if 2 of them are big question marks, how good are you going to be on defense? Like, you can feel decent about Sauce Gardner. You can feel decent about some of these young guys, but if Mooney and Buck are not playing like at their level, you're not going to have that great of a defense this year.
Sure. I also wanted to ask you about Sauce. Played 2.2 games basically.
Right.
Like, gosh, man, Colts. Yeah, like you said, just the end of the year was just brutal. You go and make this big trade, and I think I actually tweeted it a couple days ago. I think it was Nico was asking who's the most underrated corner or someone, but I was responding. I was like, honestly, it might be Sauce Gardner because like people don't even think he's like top 10 anymore. I wanted to like you've gone in, watched all his snaps, and like, what did you see from him? Like, is it a matter of trying to tell people here's your 2 minutes runway to like tell people he's great? Did you see more concerns? What did you see when you watched him?
Yeah, when the Colts traded for him, I actually watched pretty much all of his career snaps because I was just curious to be like what the arc of his career was. And obviously the first couple years, like, it's so hard to watch it as us because like you're not seeing the ball thrown his way at all, right? You're like, oh my gosh, throw the ball his way so I can see him do something. But it just kind of speaks to the reputation he had and where he was early in his career. Then 2024 happens. He has that big step back, and like, he wasn't an awful corner in 2024, but he was more of like, I want to say replacement level, like an adequate starting corner. And that's where I think the notion of him not being that guy anymore really came into the public mind, where it's like, okay, Sauce Gardner is not who he was. But I think we got too stuck on that mindset because last year he was Sauce Gardner again. Like, early in the year with the Jets, he played some really good football. Like, he was barely targeted. And when he was targeted, he was making plays on the football. Then he comes to Indy. And mind you, when he came to Indy that first game against Atlanta, he had just come off of an overseas trip to London, flew back to America, then had to fly out to Germany to play that game. So
That's insane.
Yes, he had all that travel, right? And he has to go play in Germany to play that game for the Colts. Played some really good ball in that game. Like, the Colts, they were running.
That was all within a week.
Yeah, that was all within like.
He's got to go play in a remote defense after spending his whole week on an airplane.
Yeah, pretty much. And
that's insane.
Yeah, he played some good. Like, he gave up a 2-point conversion to Drake London, but aside from that, he had like, I think he had 2 pass breakups. He had one where he should have caught it. Should have been an interception. That's always going to be the big knock with him for sure.
Yeah.
Is not coming down with the picks, but. You know, he's just a high level cover guy, big physical guy who can be, you know, a little bit grabby, but that's, refs kind of let him go a little bit with it because it's just who he is as a player. But there's some downsides in his game. I don't think he's the best athlete in the world. Like, I don't think he's like, you know, Quinyon Mitchell level athlete or anything like that. And I don't think that he's the best tackler. I wish he was a little bit better of a tackler at his size.
He's slender.
Yeah, very slender, but I think you get a guy who can play some press man. I think he's got some of the best zone feel and instincts in the league. I think that's severely underrated with him. Is just his overall feel and zone is just uncanny. And I think that, the 2 first-round picks will always be associated with him, right? Because they gave up so much to get him. It just really depends on how healthy he is this year and what he gives you, because I think he's fully capable of being worth that. It's just he's got to stay healthy this year for the Colts.
Totally.
So very, very good player. I'm certainly on board. Like, he's a top 10 corner in this league. I'm not going to be crazy and say he's like a top 3 guy right now, or because there's just so many good corners. But yeah, I think the ESPN article had him as like 9th in the NFL. I think he's in that tier with like numbers 7 through 12. Like, he's in that tier of NFL. And I'm kind of with you where it's like, if people don't have him that high, then he might be the most underrated guy in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Did you write down, because I sent you the list of like the award winners. Did you prepare a name for all of them?
Okay.
Or were you going to kind of, because I did this to the Titans guys too. And we were running short on time, so I just want the answer, and the interpretation is going to be up to the viewer.
Okay.
So you don't get to explain it, but it kind of I don't know. It's fun to think about. Oh, why was he thinking that?
Yeah. Okay.
But
I'll do that.
So here we go. Team MVP.
It's got to be Daniel Jones. I'm not even gonna say it. It's going to be. It's got to be Daniel Jones. That's my quickest.
Okay.
way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You kind of already answered this, but biggest wild card / pivotal factor, not named Daniel Jones.
Yeah, Mooney Ward, or DeForest Buckner, either one of those guys, I'd say falls into that.
Okay, breakout offense.
I'm going to say Tanner Bortolini, just because I don't think he's as well known around the league or to the layman as what he should be. But Tanner Bortolini, I'll say, even though I don't know how much higher his play is going to jump up, Tanner Bortolini, make sure you're watching him next season.
Yep.
And then
breakout defense.
Yeah, defense. I'll say Justin Wally in the slot. This year.
Yeah. Yep. Unsung hero.
Ooh. Josh Downs this year. Let's go Josh Downs for this season with the higher role.
I thought you might pick Mo Alley Cox.
I picked him as we did this joking award on our squad show for Locked On Colts. It's called the Ashton Dulin Everyman Award last year, and I gave it to Mo Alley Cox because he's super underrated for what he does. But I think Downs might surprise people this year.
I like it. All right, fantasy MVP, which I guess might be Josh Downs.
Could be Josh Downs. It depends on the valuation that you're going for, right? Because I think Downs you can draft a little bit later, especially in those PPR leagues. But if you're anything like me and you took this guy last year, he was probably your MVP on your championship runs, Jonathan Taylor.
Yep.
We'll see if he can stay healthy again this year. But he had 18 touchdowns last year. It's hard to beat that.
All right, final question. Is over or under 7.5 wins is the Vegas line for the Colts.
Look, man, I don't know if Shane Steichen can go under 8. I don't know if he can go above 9, but I don't think he can go under 8 at this point. So I'm gonna go over, and I'll let you guys interpret how high that over is. I'll go over the 7.5.
As this video rolls out, my prediction is just about to come, and that's very funny to think about what the viewers are about to see here in just a second.
Okay, great.
But it's 8. I predicted 8 wins.
Wow, you're really going on a limb there, Marcus.
All right, Zach, tell the people where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, you guys can check me out over on Locked On Colts, the daily host over there with Jake Arthur. We have the squad show that goes once or twice a week, depending on where we are in the season. I write over at horseshoehuddle.com, and also I do a little bit of film stuff on my YouTube channel on the side. Marcus probably knows how tough that can be to do film stuff on YouTube, but I do a little bit of film stuff with Colts players on YouTube, so you can check me out. It's just Zach Hicks on YouTube.
When you're allowed to post it.
Right, when you do just enough editing, you're allowed to post it.
Right. Yeah. Depending how patient you're feeling that week.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks, Zach. This was a ton of fun as always. And thanks to all you guys for tuning in. So huge thanks again to Zach. Zach's really the superstar of the Colts deep dive. Let's be honest, but let's have some fun and get into predictions territory for the Colts. I did spoil my win prediction for the Colts at the end of that interview there. It's 8 wins, but I hate doing a prediction for this team specifically because this team, I think, is probably the most injury-dependent team for this season. We'll see if that holds true as we go through the rest of these teams, but I think that's probably fair. So it's like, if I have to make a pick, like, I guess I'll go 8 wins, but I think you get the sense, like, the range of outcomes for this team is really vast, and that's maybe where, for this team, the floor and ceiling is maybe more important. I went with a win floor of 4. Like, if Daniel Jones is unavailable and some of these other things go wrong, like, I think Steichen still gives you a good floor, but there's only so much you can handle. And obviously this team really struggled to win games down the stretch when things got off the rails. So if they're closer to that version of this Colts team, like, there is a worst case scenario outcome where you are just one of the worst teams in the league. But I think the win ceiling is 11 wins. I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that this was one of the best teams in the NFL last year. They have more upside on defense than they did last year, with Sauce in the picture now. And Daniel Jones, like, if he can be what he was last year, I think that's a double-digit win team pushing 10, 11 wins. So really vast range of outcomes. And especially because, like, I don't think their schedule is awful. I think it's at worst, it's like middle of the road. Like, I think their division is pretty middle in terms of how you would stack the divisions. They also got, like, other more middle ranking divisions. Like, I guess we could really sit down and rank them 1 through 8, but, like, okay, AFC North and NFC East, where their matchups, like, just kind of solid divisions across the board. I wouldn't say any of those are, like, powerhouse divisions, though. And then outside of the sort of, like, mandatory scheduled lineup, like, you get a relatively favorable run at this. Like, you get most of your hardest games out of the way early. Their first 3 games, like, they might start 0-3. Baltimore, at Kansas City, and Houston. But that you got to play Houston twice. You at least get them at home there. Patrick Mahomes might not be there for week 2. That's obviously up in the air, but you might get lucky there. And, like, Baltimore, that's the first game with Jesse Minter in that defense. Like, new defensive coordinators sometimes take some time. So, like, you could do worse with that being the worst stretch of your season. And then you got to go to London. You play, Washington. You get a mix of, like, somewhat winnable games at Washington, at Pittsburgh, Tennessee, at Minnesota. Not easy games, but you can kind of get back on track there. You get a stretch in the middle of the season there where you have Miami and the Giants sandwiching at Houston, which is one of your hardest division games. And then you get the bye week to really, finish strong. Hopefully you got to go to Philly, but then you finish with at Tennessee, Cincinnati at home, at Cleveland, and Jacksonville at home. So, like, it could be worse in terms of schedule. So I do think that bodes well for them as long as they take care of business and they stay healthy. The schedule could be a lot worse for the Colts. So my gun to my head prediction, I'm liking it less and less because I feel like I should have either gone things go south and they win 5 games or done the, like, 10-11 win thing. Like, I kind of took the cop-out option with the Colts, and maybe that was a mistake, but I don't know. I'm going to go with 8 wins for the prediction. We'll see how that ages. Impossible team to predict this season, I think, one way or another, at least on a macro scale. But as we finish up with our team superlative awards on an individual player basis, let's talk about some of my predictions for these guys. So for team MVP, and this is more of a predictive nature, I think in my gut, I'm slightly more pessimistic that the defense comes together because I wanted to pick Sauce Gardner, and I do think Sauce has a case for being the best player on this team, but I ended up actually leaning with Quentin Nelson here. If there's one area for this team that, if this is a predictive segment, like, I'm the most optimistic about, I think it is that offensive line. And yeah, Jonathan Taylor is incredible, but I don't know, with the rising value of guard and the fact that Quentin Nelson is, still, like, in the peak of his powers and playing even better the last 2 years than he has for a while. If he's the best player on maybe the best offensive line in the league and the offense is more the driver of this team, that's my argument for Quentin Nelson. There's some really good players on this team that you can make a case for. I thought about Tyler Warren, JT, Sauce Gardner. There's a lot of good here, right? Biggest wild card, and it's non-quarterback for this award. Daniel Jones obviously should be the choice there, but I do think it's DeForest Buckner. Both him and Shavarius Ward, as we talked about with Zach, are, like, major wild cards here. But at least if, like, Shavarius Ward is out, you still have Sauce. You still got some depth there. If DeForest Buckner only plays 4 games or if he regresses, that defensive line could be in some pretty rough shape. So he's the biggest wild card there. And just I'm D-line over secondary anyway. That plays a factor too. But breakout offense, I'm going to go with Jalen Travis, I believe. Like I'm kind of buying into the idea that this offensive line could be really special. And the fact that Zach picked Tanner Bortolini, he's in consideration here. I do think Jalen Travis, though, breaking out as a franchise right tackle could be a huge breakout there. Breakout defense, I feel like you kind of had to go Justin Wally here. I thought about Akeem Davis-Gaither, but like that's more of like the idea of Akeem Davis-Gaither, like the developmental third-round athlete that played the hybrid safety at App State that is familiar with Lou Anarumo's defense. Have I ever actually been like impressed by his tape? Not really. But like theoretically, he is a choice here. But Justin Wally, if he just breaks out as a decent starting slot, like that's a breakout. And I didn't really know who else to go with, especially because I'm not choosing rookies. Like CJ Allen and AJ Halsey could break out, but those are rookies, right? So that was a tough one for the Colts. Unsung hero, Mo Alley Cox. Like the fact that this team runs a lot of heavy personnel, that he doesn't just help the run game and is a really good blocker himself, but he does open up a lot for Tyler Warren as well, who is going to get the credit out of a lot of those schemed up looks where they're able to move him around out of heavy personnel and get him matched up on, linebackers and edge rushers at times. Like Mo Alley Cox opens up all that stuff. So easy pick there. And then fantasy MVP, if we're hunting value here, it's hard to do because Jonathan Taylor is a good pick for sure and was someone I thought about, but he's, first round pick. And like Tyler Warren, I wanted to make my pick. I think Tyler Warren has a great year, but he's going as tight end 4. Like the expectations are off the charts for him. If we're value hunting, I think Josh Downs probably is the pick there. The fact that he's going to play more outside wide receiver, Pittman's out of the picture. And like Pittman did get a lot of like short to intermediate targets where Josh Downs eats. So he's going about 10th round. It's probably not a ton of value, but like, I think that's got to be the choice there for a guy that just sees an uptick in production, maybe gets his first 1,000-yard season this year. It's already come close a couple times, so I don't think that's crazy. But there are your final predictions for the Indianapolis Colts. This was a really fascinating deep dive. I think this is quite possibly the most volatile, unknown team for the year this year, at least that has like real upside because of how much they were cooking in the early part of last season. So let me know in the comments down below. Did I get you more excited about this Colts team this year? What do you think happens with this Colts team? And who do you think comes next now as we enter the teens of my power rankings with the 19th team coming up next? But thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. And I will see you soon for that next deep dive. Cheers.